You're watching CNN. I'm Julia Chatterley in New York, and we begin in Ukraine. We are awaiting the arrival of evacuees from the devastated city of Mariupol. These are civilians that have spent weeks trapped in the basement of the Azovstal steel plant, which remains under relentless attack by Russian forces. More than 100 civilians are still sheltering inside that facility. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian military says it killed 5 Russian soldiers as they attempted to attack the facility. Now, despite the danger, Ukrainian fighters hope to evacuate more civilians as soon as today. Mariupol's mayor says a convoy with some of the plant's evacuees is headed towards Ukraine-held territory. More on that just ahead. Now, a major shift in the war could be less than a week away. US and other Western officials say Russian President Vladimir Putin may formally declare war on Ukraine as soon as May 9th. A declaration of war would allow Putin to fully mobilize Russian reserve forces. May 9th, known in Russia as Victory Day, commemorates the former Soviet Union's defeat of the Nazis back in 1945. And Germany is ready to agree an embargo on Russian oil. That, according to the German finance minister. It will be a huge step for a country that prior to the war got 35% of its oil and over half of its gas from Russia. Christian Lindner told me Germany would not be blackmailed by the Kremlin into paying for natural gas in rubles and that it's ready to take action.
It takes time to reduce the dependency. It was a mistake to be dependent in this way, but we are making progress. So in the end, we will be completely independent from Russia.
And we've got much more from that exclusive interview coming up later on in the show. Now, in the last hour, the Élysée Palace says that French President Emmanuel Macron has spoken to President Putin. Officials say the call lasted for over 2 hours. We're awaiting more details on what specifically was discussed. Now, Nick Payton-Walsh joins us from Zaporizhia, where he's waiting for those evacuees from Mariupol. Nick, give us the latest. It's a minute-by-minute wait, I believe.
Yeah, and I think those minutes may be smaller and smaller as we await the arrival here. We're told possibly at some point in the next hour we may see those first evacuees from Azovstal. Now, that has been a point of arrival that's been delayed repeatedly, it seems, because of their delay at Russian-held checkpoints still in Russian territory. We've seen people arriving here from Vasilievka, which is actually the last Russian-controlled town before they hit a no-man's land. I was told about an hour ago by one UN official here that they thought the predominant part of the convoy from Azovstal had in fact left Russian territory, and they may be very soon to arrive here. The Deputy Prime Minister, Irina Vereshchuk, has just been giving a press conference behind here where she says, in fact, we're expecting to see about 106 people emerging from the Azovstal factory arrive behind us here imminently. Now, there had been a thought by the United Nations and Red Cross that as that convoy moved, it might attract or get extra individuals from the areas around joining it and using that safe passage to secure their exit from Russian-held territory. Remember, while the focus is on these hundreds of people trapped inside Azovstal under intense bombardment that continued last night as Ukraine's forces there appear to have made a last stand as they're now encircled by Russia and increasingly finding their numbers reducing as civilians are indeed allowed out. Of course, outside of those Azovstal numbers, there are any of 100,000 civilians still trapped in Mariupol, possibly seeking the humanitarian corridor here. And so while we have over the past days, Julia, seen slowly people arriving here from Vasilievka, from Mariupol as well, they've been having their own journey that's lasted a number of days. And so the reason why this Azovstal arrival is so important, as it is, many hope, possibly some kind of omen for the days and weeks ahead. If the UN and Red Cross are able to get these Azovstal few out, that may establish a mechanism which could enable thousands more to follow in their footsteps. Urgent, frankly, because of the risk of disease, the current Russian occupation and the intense bombardment of Mariupol. But at this stage, stage. It seems the journey of those few Azov-style evacuees has been pretty torturous. They have, it seems, been asked to make quite a circuitous route. There have been images of some, it seems, headed in an easterly direction out of Mariupol first. It's unclear, frankly, the route they took, and that's going to be a key question that we'll be asking those who arrive here. But this massively, heavily expected arrival, possibly imminent in the hour ahead, Julia.
Hugely anticipated, Nick, as you say, and we will come straight back to you if we get that arrival. So we await with you. Nick Payton-Walsh there. Thank you. Now, Russia's invasion of Ukraine is a war in all but name. Russia refers to the offensive as a special operation, but that could be about to change. Western officials believe President Putin may formally declare war on Ukraine next Monday, and that's May the 9th. CNN correspondent Scott McLean joins us now from the city of Lviv. Scott, great to have you with us. I mean, for most of us, it's been war since the first day of the invasion. Explain the significance of what this declaration would mean, that date, of course, May the 9th, and what the implications perhaps could be for the ongoing bombardment in the east.
Sure. So, Julia, of course, May 8th actually is VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, the day when the German surrender took effect, officially ending the war. Because of the time difference, that surrender actually took effect on May 9th. So this is a hugely symbolic day for Russia and back then the Soviet Union in their victory over the Nazis in Germany. And so that is why, because the Russians have sort of framed this invasion of Ukraine as a denazification operation, that is why Western military sources think that the Russians are keen to use this for its symbolic value, and that President Putin may well announce something on that day, either announce a victory or, as you say, perhaps declare war or announce a significant escalation in this special military operation, as the Russians like to call it. The British Defense Secretary Ben Wallace suggested that perhaps Putin was looking to sort of galvanize support for this war and maybe sign up some new reservists. A formal war declaration would also give Putin the chance to institute a formal draft and also call up reservists. Now, Pope Francis, of all people, Julia, actually said in an interview with an Italian newspaper that he was told by the Hungarian Prime Minister, who was told by President Putin, that May 9th would mark the end of this operation. Obviously, Pope Francis is hoping that that's true. He's not real optimistic, but he said that perhaps that explains the recent troop surge in the eastern part of the country and the recent escalation in fighting that we have seen there. Pope Francis also, Julia, said that he would be happy. He has asked if he can go and visit and speak with Putin in Moscow to try to bring some message of peace if it's helpful.
Or perhaps end of operation and start of war, depending on your terminology, as we've seen here. We shall see. Scott, what more are you learning as well? Because I know you've been investigating the so-called filtration process that Russia's been using on certain Ukrainians to decide where they go and how they go and whether they remain. What more can you tell us?
Yeah, so this is the process that, according to the Mariupol mayor, is holding up the 100 or so civilians who are headed towards Zaporizhia, because they're all having to go through this so-called filtration process to get out of Russian-held territory. We more commonly hear about this from people in Mariupol who were pushed either by choice or by the simple fact that they didn't have any better options into Russian-held territory, and many into Russia itself. And so I spoke with two people, for instance, a while back who had left Mariupol and gone into Russia. It was the only option that they had to find some safety. And they said that they spent 2 days at a filtration camp, as they call it, in a town east of Mariupol called Bezimene in Russian-held territory. It is there that they were registered formally. They were fingerprinted and photographed there as well. They said that they were then taken to another checkpoint, another part of this filtration process closer to the border, and that is where it was really the men that had a big problem. They were questioned. It was very clear that the Russians were looking for any saboteurs or anyone with ties to extremism, and then they got a similar treatment once they actually entered Russian territory as well, and were staying at a state shelter there temporarily. That is where they were questioned. The men were made to strip down. They were looking for any kind of tattoos or markings that might associate them with extremist groups. Now, The Ukrainian president frames this filtration process very differently. He says that this is a place where Ukrainians are raped, tortured, or killed. It is very difficult to know for sure because, of course, Julia, we're able to speak to the people who actually made it out of that filtration process. We don't know what happened to the people who were forced to stay there.
And that's the point. Scott, great work. Awful to hear, but it's a must that we do. Scott McLean, thank you. Now in Brussels, the EU is expected to finalise a 6th round of sanctions against Russia, including a possible oil embargo. In an exclusive interview, German Finance Minister Christian Lindner told me his country will support an oil ban. He said they're ready, even as soon as today.
Now we are ready. We have prepared ourselves to be less dependent on Russian energy imports. It takes time to reduce the dependency. It was a mistake to be dependent in this way, but we are making progress. We can reduce the imports, starting with coal, then oil. It will take more time to be independent from Russian natural gas imports, but we will continue. So in the end, we will be completely independent from Russia.
But just to be clear, are you ready to announce an oil embargo or to agree to an oil embargo this week, as early as this week?
Germany stands ready for new sanctions, including an oil embargo, but we are negotiating this decision with our European partners. We will make a decision together. And so at the moment, Germany stands ready, but we feel responsibility for all our European partners, and we will make a decision together.
Are you saying that there's going to have to be carve-outs, perhaps, for nations like Hungary, who need more time?
No, I don't want to be part of this speculations I've read in international media. Today, I can assure you Germany is ready to reduce the oil imports. We know others at the moment are considering this question carefully. I remember the US Minister of Finance, Janet Yellen, who suggested the Europeans to make their decisions carefully, even when it comes to oil. And so we are considering, but talking about Germany, we are ready.
You've moved very quickly. The economy minister said that Germany could end its dependence on Moscow oil within days. And I'm quoting, does Germany even need a phase-in period for an oil embargo, or could you literally just say no more Russian oil?
Yes, we could now clearly say we don't need Russian oil anymore. We have been able to diversify our energy imports. And so Germany don't need Russian oil imports anymore. But we have to consider the effects on other members of the European Union. And we have to take into consideration the effects on the prices on the world markets, of course. And so Germany stands ready, but we won't make this decision only on our own.
More from the German finance minister throughout the show, including how they're paying for Russian gas, their decision to provide heavy weaponry to Ukraine, and what the endgame for the war might look like. Okay, for now, let me bring you up to speed with one other top story making headlines around the world. In the United States, stunned Americans are reacting to news that the Supreme Court could soon strike down Roe versus Wade, the 1973 decision that protects abortion rights nationwide. News outlet Politico leaked a Supreme Court draft that would overturn the law, a shocking breach of the court's secrecy, if nothing else. If this is real, it would be the most consequential abortion decision in decades. White House correspondent John Harwood joins us now from Washington. John, great to have you with us. It's a 98-page draft. I believe it's still not been authenticated by CNN. And of course, it's possible that a justice, and it's 5-4 on this, could change their mind. But if this stands and is announced, it would fundamentally change abortion rights, and it would hand it back to states to make a decision how this is handled.
It would, Julia, and a significant number of states would outlaw abortion. A significant number have already moved in that direction. Some have trigger laws that would say when, if and when the Supreme Court strikes down Roe v. Wade, they have a law already in place to outlaw abortion. This upends, as you indicated, a right that's been in existence for 50 years since Roe v. Wade. But it also upends American politics because you have a narrow majority of the country that opposes an outright abortion ban. And this is going to shake up the deck for the politics both of 2022 and of 2024 if, in fact, this ruling takes place. You can expect, of course, states that are in favor of abortion rights and are in control by Democratic governors and legislatures. They will, nothing will change there. They will codify and maintain the legal right to abortion. So it's not as if abortions will not take place, but it will be more difficult for people in states that, particularly in the South and the Midwest and the Great Plains, that decide to take steps toward banning abortion. People in those states are going to have to find other outlets, perhaps less safe outlets, more difficult outlets. So significant impact on the American people and on American politics, Julia.
Yes, profound implication for millions of women across the country now and in the future. But your point about the politics is interesting. I guess my first question is, how does the White House handle this? And just month out from the midterm elections, is this something perhaps that Democratic voters could harness and decide actually this is something that they feel strongly enough about to get them to the polls?
Yes, and one of the things we do expect to hear from the president by a written statement, perhaps speaking on camera as he's preparing to travel to Alabama today to visit a facility that manufactures Javelin missiles that the United States is shipping to Ukraine. But we've been locked into a situation for a number of months where President Biden has very low approval ratings. We've got high inflation within the United States, as you know, which is a big concern to the American people. You've got still the lingering effects of COVID. You've got high gas prices. You've got a whole range of difficulties that are weighing down President Biden's approval ratings and depressing the outlook for Democrats in midterms. Presidents usually have setbacks in midterms. Their parties lose House seats. Democrats have very few to lose and maintain control. All of a sudden, this is an issue that has the potential to galvanize Democrats who've been dispirited by some of the gridlock in Washington, some of the problems that President Biden has faced, and that could shake up the deck. It may not completely change the outlook for the November midterms, but it does add a significant element of electricity into that Democratic base that has the potential to have significant impacts both in the House and Senate races.
And we await that statement from the White House in the interim. John Harwood, great to have you with us. Thank you. Okay, straight ahead. Reliance is a reality. Germany's finance minister tells me the country is dependent on Russian gas, but denies paying it on the Kremlin's terms. And Stolly Vodka wants you to raise a glass to Ukraine with a limited edition bottle, raising money to help support refugees. That's coming up. Welcome back. Reliance on Russian oil is one thing for Germany, but reliance on Russian gas is a greater challenge. Germany still gets 35% of its gas from Russia, though that was more than 50% before the war. Last week, Poland and Bulgaria had their gas supplies cut off by Russia after refusing to pay in rubles. Well, now Germany is being accused of allowing its energy companies to engage in backdoor ruble swaps that allow their payment in euros to be exchanged into rubles. I asked the German finance minister whether Berlin is paying for Russian gas on Putin's terms now and in the future.
No, we won't. Germany can't be blackmailed. We know there is a dependency on natural gas from Russia. It's a reality. We need time to reduce this dependency. And it's not only a question of economic consequences, but we have to face that important industries would be forced to stop their production immediately. So it's a very serious challenge for us to be less dependent on Russia. But having said this, Germany can't be blackmailed. Contracts are contracts, and all these contracts are based on payments in dollar or euro. And so German contractors should pay in euro and dollar. This is the situation of the contracts, and we should not change because Putin needs ruble for his war chest.
So just to be clear, you've told German companies, German energy companies, do not pay or engage in any form of euro to ruble swaps, even in Russian bank accounts. They've been told they can't do that. They must not do that.
What Russian banks do on their own is not a matter of the German government. But our position is very clear. All contracts based on payments in euro and dollar. And so we should not switch to ruble only because Putin wants to fund his war chest. That's not in the German interest. We know we are dependent on this energy imports. It's not a comfortable situation for us. We have to face this situation and to change it as fast as possible. But we are not willing to be blackmailed, and this is what we tell private sector companies as well.
So that means there's still a chance that German supplies coming from Russia are cut off, like Poland, like Bulgaria. How high is that risk in your mind if you're sticking to the contract terms, as you say?
We make responsible decisions. In my perspective, there is a risk, but we feel responsible even in the perspective of such a risk. I don't think that Putin will stop the gas supplies for Germany only because we are paying on the base of contracts in dollar and euro. But from day to day, we are less dependent on Russian gas imports. And so for every situation we have to face, we are prepared, but we are not willing to have such a situation short term because the economic consequences would be serious.
Can we talk about that? Because the economy minister talked about a structural break in the economy, and some estimates emanating from German economists have said up to 238 billion euros worth of cost over 2 years to the German economy. Is that reasonable in your mind, that extent of damage? What might it look like?
I have not an assessment what the precise consequences would be. In my eyes, no one has an exact picture what the consequences would be. It's not only the economic cost of an energy import stop. I think more worrying are the long-term consequences for certain industries in Germany. A complete stop of production could destroy plants, could destroy energies for long term. And my concern is that in such a case, which differs from the pandemic, certain industries would not return to Germany. There would not be a rebuilding of these structures. There would be a private sector investment in other parts of the world, but special industries in chemistry, energy supply, and others, they would probably leave Germany completely. And so we have to do everything what we can do to secure the gas supply for the German private sector.
My takeaway from this conversation, the number of times he admitted policy mistakes in the past and that this overall had been a lesson for Germany. And while for Ukraine, no energy embargo can come soon enough, Linda told me that the policy decisions of this magnitude simply take time. He said before this, it took his country 2 decades just to open an airport in Berlin. Yet today, they're revolutionizing their entire energy supply chain in less than 1 year. Interesting. We're back after this. Stay with CNN. Welcome back. We've just learned 106 people evacuated from the Azovstal steel plant will soon be arriving in relative safety. They're due to arrive in Zaporizhzhia. That's according to Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister. But those evacuees, of course, the luckiest ones. Many more are still trapped in that steel plant under Russian fire for several weeks. Meanwhile, Western officials believe Russian President Putin could formally declare war on Ukraine as soon as May the 9th, the day Russia commemorates its World War II win against Nazi Germany. And a physical form of resistance. Stoli Group has launched a limited edition Stoli vodka bottle to raise money for Ukraine. The aim to raise $1 million for the World Central Kitchen, an organisation helping feed Ukraine's refugees. And it's not the first time they've chosen to act. Stoli Group, which owns Stolichnaya Vodka, changed the drink's name to just Stoli after Russia invaded Ukraine. Although founded in Russia, the company moved production to Latvia back in 2000. Stoli quickly condemned Russia's attack, saying it has a long history of fighting the Russian regime. Joining us now is Damien McKinney, CEO of Stoli Group. Damien, great to have you on the show once again. The money, the $1 million that you hope to raise, is vitally important, but I do think it's bigger than this. It's about doing something in a moment where many of us feel a long way away and unable to do something to help.
Julia, thank you. Nice to see you again. Yeah, look, it is about action. It's very easy, I suppose, to do quick fixes, and I don't believe ours was a quick fix at the beginning. We were very clear, and I said, I think I said at the time this was very personal. The question is, what next? And I think, and if you probably, I'm not sure if you can see it, but we have this beautiful bottle here, and our view was got two different angles on this one. One is, and as I was listening to your commentary around the possible declaration of war, the question is, what are we doing to stand by Ukraine? And more importantly as well, beyond the colours of Ukraine, but also there's this dove, because it is also about really reinforcing that it's about freedom and peace at the end of the day. And none of us can accept watching refugees and the sort of humanitarian atrocities that are going on at the moment. So we really want to ensure that this stays front and center in everybody's mind. I think there's a second piece in this, Julia, which is, again, the great work that World Central Kitchen is doing. And we as a team came together. And again, the lovely thing is it's very organic from all the team around the world, and said, what can we do to further support them? Hence the $1 million. And when you look at the sort of statistics emerging, they are producing over 300,000 meals a day across, I think it's something like 2,400 locations. And using over 400 different restaurateur supply organizations. So being able to work in partnership with them to really make a difference on the ground, for us, again, is a real sense of action. I think there's a final piece to all of this story, is I really think it's a moment of reflection, I hope, for all of us. The one thing that I give credit to our consumers, they are intelligent, thoughtful people who I'm sure not only watching this, but are clearly looking at brands and are saying in every shape or form, I want these to be brands that I can, obviously there's a great experience, etc., and they look lovely, but can I really trust them? And I think it's more than just how they're produced. It's what the organization stands for. And I believe, and we believe in Stoli, that this is a moment where we want to continue to stand tall and provide the appropriate leadership that says, let's keep Ukraine very much center of mind, and importantly, continue to drive this sense of peace and freedom around the world.
Yeah, a representation of peace. We're familiar with World Central Kitchen on this show. Nate Mook has been on talking about their work. They're brilliant and they're incredibly brave, and some of their workers were injured recently as well. So I can't say more than you have on that. Our support fully behind them as well. What about for your Ukrainian employees as well? Because as you said, consumers are smart. They recognize a brand. They also want to be invested in something that is providing some support and solidarity. But what about for your Ukrainian workers as well? How do they view this bottle and the stance?
No, that's, I mean, Yeah, they're very proud of it. It is a beautiful symbol of resistance, as it's being referred to. You know, jokingly, one of our Ukrainian employees said, you know, this has got to be Putin's worst nightmare to see Stoli with the Ukrainian colours. But so they feel that very strongly that we're standing for the right cause. I think, secondly, from our point of view, we continue to support them. We've recruited a number of people over the last few weeks. By the way, this is not just charity. They are extraordinarily capable people from those markets as well. So isn't it wonderful that you could help and have these amazing people? And it's not just the employees. What we've been doing is, I think I mentioned in the last time we talked, of actually putting recuperation and all, you know, hopefully it'll be a very positive story.
Fingers crossed. You were also writing to one of your employees who'd become a soldier as well, and you were talking to us about your experiences and the loneliness of that. How's he doing too? Because I've often thought about him.
Yeah, thank you for that. No, the first thing is he's safe and well, but I suppose it's two points. One is, I wrote to him last night. I spoke to his wife today. I think the key is that he knows we're there. Because however much we think things may or may not be improving, those dark hours are still very much upon them. And when you make the comment that you did, that the possible declaration of war, there are still some very dark moments ahead. I think there's a second casualty in all of this, and therefore person we need to look after actually is the spouses, is the partners. And it was interesting talking to her this morning because the pressure is really telling there as well. They've been separated for quite a long period of time. She's got a beautiful son in this particular case, and it's actually making sure she's okay.
Yeah, our hearts are with all of them, and yes, their stories as resonant and relevant as those that are fighting too. It's all a form of fighting, I think. When you were on last time as well, we talked about the decisions that you'd made with your supply chain, that you'd moved your ethanol purchases to Slovakia. That was costing more money. The sort of challenge that represented for some of the Russian farmers and the suppliers and the distributors. I just wanted to hear more broadly about the sort of the business challenges that you faced and the pricing pressures as well, because there are many spheres to this beyond the human cost that obviously is very, very close fit for your company and for your people too.
No, thank you, Juliet. Look, I think everybody's facing inflation and of one kind or another, driven by energy, etc. We have a particular, and we're all facing those, and we're all having to manage costs as best we can. I think in the particular, however, we looked at very much how could we not just deal with the Russia piece, but actually we had a lot of employees, as you rightly said, in Ukraine, where we closed down factories. The good news is we are reopening them. So wherever we can, we are reopening the factories and indeed getting people back to work and getting the system up and running. So whatever we can do to support them to do that I think actually has almost become a top priority, because that's important for the sort of self-esteem, let alone from a sort of market economy perspective. Beyond that, we're continuing to work with the markets like Slovakia and Poland, etc., to take up the slack when it comes to production. Beyond that, we're, like I said, everybody's managing inflation, but actually we're feeling very confident now that having sort of adapted to the situation, even more so that Ukraine's coming back online, that we've got a very good future ahead.
And are you finding workers where you're reopening the factories there? Because obviously some of the men are fighting, there's other responsibilities and people have left. Are you managing to find people to work there and bringing old employees back, or hiring new, or both?
Both is the short answer. It's a great one. Look, it's a balancing act, but as the battle sort of moves away, those quite a lot of, as you know, sort of territorial type soldiers are able to double hat and go back to work. So and a lot of women who are leaning in and also working. So it's a and I didn't mean that in a pejorative sense. You know, it's a complete team effort here, and as one partner, whether a male or so a man or woman is fighting, the man or woman who stayed behind or is doing something else is also leaning in to pick up some of these other tasks, including the work in the factories.
Damien, great to have you with us. Thank you so much for your insights again, and we'll chat again soon. Damien McKinney,
Hello.
the CEO of Stolle Group. Thank you so much for that. Now, to a story that we have been following all morning, and I do have good news on it. We are seeing the bus arrivals. I'm talking about the evacuees from the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol. We have been waiting all morning to see some of these evacuees. We mentioned that the Deputy Prime Minister had suggested that 106 evacuees were on buses making their way to Zaporizhzhia. It looks like we are now seeing those buses arriving, and that is the shot that you are seeing now. So already people coming off those buses, being welcomed, I'm sure, to huge, huge relief after weeks of being stranded in that Mariupol steel plant. We are going to provide all the details, obviously the first conversations of simply what those people have been through, but now they have arrived in Zaporizhzhia to relative safety and a welcome there. Much more on this after the break. Stay with CNN.
Have nobody here. I don't know where to go now, and has been in tears on a couple of occasions. This is the journey that they will all be making as they've endured that extraordinary escape from under Azovstal, for where she has been for weeks, and now they have to try and piece their lives back together again. You can see in the exhaustion of her face, and you can see there just the head torch around her neck, that she's clearly been living in the dark. I asked her just a moment ago, what's it like being in the sunlight? And she said, look, I'm actually having some difficulty seeing. And so these scenes are extraordinary because of the conditions people have endured over the past weeks just to get to this very point. Now, in the last 10 minutes, we've seen 4, I think, buses arrive, possibly 5, and they have emerged talking of what they've seen. And so the issue now for the United Nations and for the Red Cross is to take people from these buses here, make sure that they are in comfort, that they understand the steps ahead of them. We understand there are about 100 or so individuals who've come off these buses here and will now move towards the tents in this direction. Now, the importance of this moment for these people is, of course, deeply personal because of the time they've spent underground, enduring Russian bombardment. And I could see in that lady's bag, she was carrying just the small amounts of medicine, the plastic cup, the toothbrush, the tissue paper that had been the things she was living off over the past weeks. And round here too, there are more people emerging from these buses. Unfortunate crowd of media, because Ukraine does want the world to know exactly what they have endured. And this is hoped to be the start, that there may, using this mechanism, be yet more people to emerge from Mariupol in the weeks ahead, possibly thousands. But these scenes are fulfilling a lot of expectation and hope over the past days, and a moment, I think, of final peace for those who've been trapped in Azovstal for some cases, 2 months. Back to you.
And we should always remind, Nick, that the reason they were taking refuge there was that Russian forces were leveling the city. It was the only safe place they could find. Civilians, the deliberate target of Russian attacks, as they have been so often in this war. Nick Payton-Walsh, thanks for bringing us some of their stories. Still ahead, another story we're following. A corrections officer is now accused of helping a murder suspect escape a jail in Alabama. The last video of the two and why officials are now warning the public. That's coming up.
Welcome back. I want to take you straight back out to Zaporizhia, where Nick Payton-Walsh is standing by. Nick, we were just hearing from you before the break, some emotional scenes there. Just talk us through what you're seeing right now.
Well, you can see the unbridled joy of a family being reunited after weeks, possibly months apart. What is slightly off camera here, the head, you can see the woolly hat of a 6-month-old child boy, Sviatoslav. We know his name because he appeared on video of the first evacuees emerging from the Azovstal steel plant now. And there are, as you can see, a large number of journalists and aid workers trying to move his mother and him away. It's unclear who they were just reunited with, but clearly emotional scenes there, one of a number playing out as people come off these buses and speak of, in some cases, feeling for the, not the first, but for a rare time in the past months, sunlight on their face. We've seen a woman in her 70s emerge and carrying a plastic bag of what she'd emerged from Azovstal in her hands, medicine, paper cups, tissue paper, and clearly in tears, deeply emotional, as she now begins to wonder what the next part of her journey is. They've endured the intense fear of getting out of Azovstal, crawling up the rubble into the daylight, and now 2 days on these buses, 5 buses in total that have taken them out of Russian-held territory all the way through to here, Zaporizhia, Ukrainian-held territory. And so we're going to move back in this direction to show you the tent in which they're headed over here. evacuation welcome centre for so many. We believe there are 100 people on these buses from Azovstal, and the significance here is that these are the first evacuations from that plant, and using a mechanism engineered by the United Nations and Red Cross. It has taken a lot longer than many had hoped would be the case, but the hope is that it can be reused again and again to get some of the thousands of people, as many as 100,000 people, trapped inside Mariupol under Russian occupation, bombardments, and the imminent and escalating threat of disease. But if you just pan in this direction over here, you can see this large number of people coming out now. They will be carrying with them stories of months spent in pitch black, in basements, under the intensely fortified Azovstal steel plants, basement areas. Another family coming just to our side here, carrying a cat in their case. Dobre. Ну как? Отлично. You can see here those two raised thumbs. This is where everybody, of course, has dreamed of being for the past weeks. And now, as we saw in the face of one of the elder ladies we were talking to just now, this sense of not quite fear, but bewilderment, because she said, as she was asked, where are you going to go? She said, I don't know anybody here. I don't know anyone to talk to next. And so while there's been great fear and panic in those dark quarters of the Azovstal steel plant, now there's of course a new rebuilding of their lives that people here are going to have to do slowly. But the Ukrainian government have set up a tent, buses to look after them, to help them begin this new part of a journey slowly. And one by one, they're coming off the buses here, bringing stories of quite horrifying period of time spent underground, the intense, persistent bombardment from Russian forces. Back to you.
Thanks, Nick. The overwhelming resilience of these people on display there, and particularly the children. We will be back with you shortly. For now, that's it for the show. Stay safe. Connect the World is up next. Stay with CNN.
This is CNN Breaking News.
I'm Eleni Jarkas in Abu Dhabi, and we start with breaking news. The long-awaited arrival in Zaporizhia of a civilian convoy for Mariupol. These are live pictures coming through from Zaporizhia right now of the evacuees that have arrived from Mariupol. Ukraine's deputy prime minister says the convoy was carrying 106 people who managed to get out of the Azovstal plant over the weekend. It was slow going as the convoy had to travel through Russian-controlled territory. While they have arrived safely, tens of thousands of others remain trapped in Mariupol. Nick Payton-Walsh is in Zaporizhia. Nick, you are on the ground right now witnessing the arrival of these evacuees from the Azovstal plant. They have endured incredible sacrifices for weeks now. Tell us about what you're hearing.
Yeah, what you're seeing here are some of the 106 people who are coming off these buses here to a welcome from the United Nations, from the police, media as well. We're told 106 in total. They've arrived on 5 separate buses, and to scenes in which some of them have the chance to say a little bit about what they've been enduring. In fact, some still seeing for the first time in months sunlight after a 2-day journey. And Tales possessions they're carrying, one woman in her 70s with a head torch still around her neck, carrying a plastic bag of the possessions she lived with for weeks underground. But her concern when asked, "Where'd you go now?" was, "Well, I know nobody here. My life was in Mariupol." And here you can see more people still coming off the buses here, carrying with them, most of them from Azovstal, stories of what they endured for weeks underground. Azovstal, a place where they took refuge because of how heavily fortified its construction had been as a steel plant. And still here, slowly, one by one, coming off. Some of them clearly having had access to very little in terms of utilities at all in the past. And we have some smiles of relief here. Dobry dzień. Dobry dzień. And just trying now to move through to the tents arranged by the Ukrainian government to receive them here and begin to provide some kind of assistance for them to find a new life here outside of Mariupol. And the numbers here comparatively small, I should say, because we know there are 100,000 civilians thought to still be inside of Mariupol, but the fate of these 106 was so important because they had been trapped under what was increasingly the rubble of the Azovstal steel plant, and because the hope was the mechanism used to get them out of Mariupol could become something more frequently used to get some of those thousands out as well here. But scenes of jubilation,
Nick,
I think,
see children. I see children as well.
Intensity of what people have endured. Yeah, that's right.
I see children coming off the
yes,
bus as well, and I know that
women
you've also
and children, certainly.
Yeah, you also saw a baby earlier, from what we understand, that you had featured in one of your stories that made it out safely.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, there had been some video posted by Ukrainian government officials which showed a 6-month-old boy, Sviatoslav, who had turned 6 months, in fact, the day before he'd emerged from under Azovstal. We just saw him over there with his mother, reunited, I think possibly with their father, certainly a family member with whom they had an intense moment of reunification. But slowly here, stories of people who endured such intense suffering in Mariupol, and then the intensity of life under Azovstal here coming out very slowly as they, of course, try, I think, to move on into the tents over there and try and have a moment of pause after what appears to have been an agonizing 2-day journey. Eleni?
Nick, we've been talking a couple of days now. We know how delicate this evacuation process actually was, how difficult, so many delays, riddled with absolute challenges, and of course the uncertainty as well. Do we have an understanding of how long it actually took for the evacuation process?
Yeah, 2 days. I think I cannot speak for universally everybody on these buses, because we think The 106 or so out of Azovstal seem to have come together, but at the same time they may be part of 2 separate days' worth of evacuations from Azovstal. So certainly I think these people have been on the road for 2 days. That's what an official here looking after them had said. Give everybody space, let them rest, let them get water. And some may have been on the road for longer. But the importance of this mechanism here is that it was arranged by the United Nations and the Red Cross, and it's something that occurred with, it seems, the consent of Moscow. There does appear to have been a torturous journey from Russian-held territory through checkpoints, circuitous at times, coming all the way here to Ukrainian-held territory. But the hope is that mechanism could perhaps be repeated in the days ahead to get more people out as the bombardments and certainly the intense risk of disease continues inside Mariupol. Eleni?
Nick, you have rightly reminded the viewers that there are tens of thousands of people still trapped in Mariupol, and Azovstal steel plant, of course, such an important story that we've been covering. I guess the question now is, how many more people need to leave? Do we think, I mean, from your understanding, that all 106 have arrived? Is this the number that we're anticipating? Are there more people that should be coming through from the plant?
Yeah, certainly there are hundreds thought to still be within Azovstal. We don't have a precise number. 100, 200 have been suggested. Some of those will be women and children. Some of those will also appear that there are some wounded Ukrainian soldiers still within there. It's unclear if those military injured are part of any mechanism that may be used here. At this point it doesn't appear to be the case, but the people emerging on these buses are obviously the most severely at need, the ones who've endured those weeks in the darkness. And I should just point out, still blinking, one woman in her 70s, when she came out at seeing this kind of sunlight, just said it was frankly hard to see at this stage. Eleni?
Yeah, Nick, and I saw an emotional response from one of the women that you spoke to, and she was saying, I don't know where to go now. I don't know about what my life holds from here onwards. I'm seeing behind you the Red Cross. I see that people are on the ground to try and assist with what they can. Do we have any understanding of where the people are going to be staying in Zaporizhia right now and being assisted there before they move on to another city? Do we know about what route they'll be taking and how they're being assisted in understanding where to from here?
Yeah, I mean, Ukraine has a substantial resettlement program for those trying to flee from here, and these people will become part of that. The United Nations, UNICEF are here to assist, the Red Cross as well, and we do know there's obviously a mechanism established here, a tent over there where they'll begin to get their aid. We've seen buses prepared to take them off elsewhere, so clearly there will be a mechanism in place to ensure they have somewhere to go as they move on. But as of now, I think there's just a sense of relief coupled with trying to digest the extraordinary barbarity they've been seeing over the past months.
Yeah, I can only imagine, and for you as well, to witness this. You've spoken to so many of these people that have been enormously impacted, and you've seen unprecedented sacrifices that have been made. I guess the question now is, you know, what kind of information are we going to get out of the experience in Azovstal? There's a big concern about the soldiers, what is their fate, and of course, importantly, continuing the conversations to keep these evacuation efforts going, both sides deciding on when and how that will happen.
Yeah, I mean, look, this has been an entire exercise and operation where trust has been utterly lacking, and frankly from the Russian military, many modern military, you would expect to allow civilians in this number out through a humanitarian corridor. That has been absent, and the fact that these 106, not the only ones to get out, we've seen slowly over the past days a number of people coming here of their own auspices, on their own steam, just to get themselves out, but their journey has been torturous through Russian checkpoints, multiple numbers of those, up towards Vasilyansk, Vasilivka, which we've seen actually some people emerging from here, the last big Russian-held town. People today saying they've been shelling around that, and here the bus is now beginning to move on, and people slowly telling their stories. But a scene of, I think, certainly relief for those who've got out, but also too, as I say, this kind of shock, frankly, that they've been through these 2 months underground. And here we have a another bus, I think, about to move off. So.
Yeah, tell me how many buses you've seen arrive, and are they going to be going back to pick up more evacuees? Do we have any idea of the logistics here, Nick?
Yeah. 5 at the moment today. We knew this first wave was going to be small. There had been hopes that it might possibly have more individuals on it if they possibly joined up with civilians on the way, providing a broader corridor. Hey man, give a second. Abroad on a potential... Marcus, you have a moment, or the potential to possibly get more individuals out as that corridor moves? They might be able to join up and use that passage to get themselves out. Sorry, I was trying to see if somebody would come and talk to us on camera here. But that doesn't appear to have happened in this specific incident, because it does seem the Russians have been more complex in terms of who they've allowed out. As I say, the hope had been this would be a huge movement of humanity out of Mariupol, collecting those on the way with this sort of escort guarantee that the UN and Red Cross were able to provide. But that hasn't happened, and I think the small number of people we have seen emerge here, and I know these are scenes people have had great expectation for and hopes could mark the beginning of something. It is still a small number, 106, compared to the tens of thousands still trapped in Mariupol. The beginning of something, certainly, but also the complexity of this, I think, tells you a lot about how easy it's going to be moving forwards to get the volume out that need assistance.
Yeah. Nick, I'm going to leave you. I know that you need to speak to some of the evacuees. It's important to get these stories. We appreciate you bringing us this important information as it happens. This is what we're seeing coming through live from Zaporizhzhia. These are evacuees from the Azovstal steel plant. We will be coming back to you, Nick, in just a short while as the story develops. And this, of course, is the face of resilience, the images that we're seeing of these evacuees that have been trapped in the plant for around 2 months. All right, so now to an unprecedented preview of a Supreme Court ruling sending shockwaves across the US. Abortion rights advocates are up in arms after Politico published what it calls a draft version of a Supreme Court opinion that would overturn Roe versus Wade. That's the case that affirmed women's rights to an abortion in 1973. Now, CNN has not independently confirmed the document, but Politico says it is confident of its authenticity. My colleague John Berman talked to one of the Politico reporters behind that bombshell report.
It is stunning when you first do so. It's surprising, I think, to see it in this format that looks a lot like a final Supreme Court opinion. But I do think, John, if you step back and you think about the decades-long effort by conservatives and conservative legal activists to build up their numbers on the court, you think about the fact that former President Donald Trump managed to get 3 nominations and confirmations of very conservative justices to the Supreme Court, in part because of maneuvers by Senator Mitch McConnell and others. In that sense, maybe it's not that surprising. You could say this has been a long day coming, despite the way the words strike you when you first read them.
It is the culmination of efforts, as you say, decades in the making that accelerated in new ways over the last several years, and the impact is very, very real. By some estimates, we can put up a map, I think, so people can see this would, if this draft opinion becomes the real opinion, this means that these states you're seeing in red there would almost immediately outlaw or severely restrict abortion rights, and the ones in yellow could potentially do the same. So it would have a very large impact. Josh, before we get much further on this, just let's make clear exactly what you obtained and the significance of the fact that you have this draft opinion. What is a draft opinion?
So when the Supreme Court hears arguments in a case, usually within 1, 2, or 3 days after that, they have a closed-door private conference. Only the 9 justices inside that conference room, very secretive room at the Supreme Court. And each of them basically lays out their position on each case. And at that point, there is an effort to assign a majority opinion. Typically, the majority opinion is assigned by Chief Justice John Roberts or whoever the Chief Justice at the time is, if he is in the majority. And if not, it's the most senior of the other justices who's in the majority.
Well, the U.S. president is sounding off on this report. Joe Biden issued a statement just about half an hour ago saying, be cautious. We do not know whether this draft is genuine or whether it reflects the final decision of the court. And then goes on to say, I believe that a woman's right to choose is fundamental. Roe has been the law of the land for almost 50 years. And basic fairness and the stability of our law demanded that it not be overturned. Mr. Biden also called on advocates of abortion rights to choose like-minded officials at the ballot box this November. CNN's justice correspondent Jessica Schneider joins us now live from the U.S. Supreme Court. A 98-page draft opinion. I guess if this is ratified, if it does go ahead, this could be a seismic shift in women's rights.
It absolutely could be a monumental and consequential decision, Eleni, if it actually is issued. Of course, we have been saying this is just a draft opinion. It was drafted and circulated on February 10th, so a lot of time has passed between then and now. And it's also possible that even though Politico reports that Justice Alito has the backing of 4 other conservative justices to make this a 5-4 majority, it's quite possible that the justices could eventually change their votes. We're still about 8 weeks out from the end of the term. We weren't expecting any abortion ruling to come before the end of June. That's typically when the court issues its most consequential decisions. Now we have this draft opinion. We have not heard any word from the Supreme Court itself. I contacted a spokesperson last night. They said a simple and strict no comment. We had a camera outside the court, outside the home of Chief Justice John Roberts this morning. He was asked what he thought about the leak, if he would move to investigate the leak. He stayed silent, so we have not heard anything from the court. But in fact, this draft opinion, it would eliminate the constitutional right to get an abortion, something that this country has had for nearly 50 years since Roe v. Wade was decided in 1973. If this were to actually become the majority opinion that gets issued, that would be overturned. We're already seeing the repercussions of this all over the United States. If Roe v. Wade is overturned, estimates are that about half the states would move to immediately ban abortion. Many of these states have trigger laws in effect, which say that if Roe v. Wade is overturned, then abortion would immediately be banned. We've also seen a flurry of Republican-led states in recent weeks and months move to enact legislation that either severely restricts or all-out bans abortion, Eleni. So we're already seeing the Republicans in this country reading the tea leaves here, passing laws that they believe will stand up once the Supreme Court issues a decision. It remains to be seen, but it would be seismic if the Supreme Court were to continue on this path and overrule Roe v. Wade.
Yeah, an unprecedented piece of information there. We still don't know what the outcome will be. Jessica Schneider, thank you so much. And to help us understand the implications of this decision, I'm now joined by CNN legal analyst Ariva Martin. Ariva, really good to see you. And you've said that this decision in Roe versus Wade is, and I quote, not the end, but rather the beginning of the elimination of many rights and freedoms that women enjoy in the Constitution. But I want you to talk to me about the immediate implications of this potential ruling.
Yeah, the immediate implications, Eleni, are going to be devastating for literally millions of women across the United States. We just heard from the correspondent about these trigger laws. Half the states in the United States have these laws which immediately go into effect once Roe v. Wade is overturned, which makes abortion illegal in about 50% of the states in the United States. So that means women of color, poor women, women without resources and means that live in those states would have to travel, would have to find the resources to leave their state, to go to another state to exercise their freedoms over their bodies, their freedom over their own reproductive health rights. And that, as we know, can be devastating. And when you think about this draft opinion too, it's also very galling because over 50% of the residents, the citizens, the voters in the United States support women's rights to choose their own decision, make their own decisions over their reproductive rights. But yet 5 justices on the Supreme Court, 3 of whom, when confirmed, said to the Senate confirmation members that they would respect Roe v. Wade as precedent. Now for those 5 justices to make their decision about women's rights is really appalling.
And it's interesting that you say that, you know, people in the United States support women's rights. In that draft opinion paper that we saw, it mentions that actually the justices do not need to take into consideration what Americans feel, but rather what is right. And some of, it's really unambiguous in terms of what some of these justices think. They think that it should be overturned, that this precedent that was created, about 50 years ago was founded on the wrong basis, on the wrong legal basis, and it's actually not the law of the land. What do you make of some of that messaging in the draft opinion paper?
I think that's more rhetoric than it is statements rooted in the Constitution. We know that there are many rights that we enjoy in the United States that are not specifically mentioned in the Constitution. And that is kind of the foundation of this opinion, is that the word abortion is not listed, is not identified, is not stated in the Constitution. But if you follow that line of argument to its logical conclusion, the rights to privacy, for example, would not be guaranteed under the United States Constitution. So the justices are I think what we see is them following a particular ideology that has been articulated by conservatives in this country for many decades. We didn't just get here yesterday. We didn't get here 4 years ago with Donald Trump, but this has been a long and very methodical plan on the part of Republicans to roll back the rights of women. And I believe those rights are not just the rights of women, but the rights of Americans.
Areva Martin, thank you so very much. Great to have you on, and I'm sure we'll be talking about this at length over the next few weeks. Much appreciated. Now, on the date we thought Vladimir Putin might declare victory, he could in fact declare war instead. Plus, speaking softly, carry a large javelin, President Joe Biden's words, putting the spotlight on the thousands of American-made missiles sent to Ukraine. Today, he pays a symbolic visit to the factory where they're made. And welcome back. A recap of our breaking news. The long-awaited arrival in Zaporizhia of a civilian convoy for Mariupol. These are pictures that we saw live, actually. They're coming through live, I'm being told. These are arrivals, evacuees from the Azovstal steel plant into Zaporizhia. This has been 2 days in the making of evacuees desperately trying to get out. A huge effort by the Red Cross and other international NGOs to get people out. 106 people, from what we understand, have arrived, and we have of course, people on the ground that are currently speaking to some of the evacuees. The stories are emotional and also harrowing, people stuck in that steel plant for 2 months. And Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister says the convoy was carrying 106 people who managed to get out of the Azov steel plant over the weekend. In just a few hours, U.S. President now, Joe Biden, will visit a factory that makes Javelin anti-tank missiles, the weapon that has proven critical in Ukraine's defense against Russia. Already, the U.S. has delivered over 5,000 Javelins to Ukraine from American stockpiles. And the U.S. Defense Secretary says Ukrainian officials have at times asked for 500 Javelins a day. And during his stop at the facility, Mr. Biden is expected to call on Congress to quickly pass a new $33 billion aid package that would, among other things, help the U.S. replenish its own weapons stockpiles. John Harwood is at the White House with more on President Biden's visit to this Javelin-making facility. John, great to see you. Much of the security aid that's been sent to Ukraine, including the Javelin missiles, has come from a drawdown, as in existing Pentagon stocks. Will that continue?
Yes, and you know, this plant that the president's visiting today can make about 2,100 Javelin missiles a year. The United States has already drawn down its own stockpiles by shipping over 5,000 Javelins to Ukraine. That is going to continue. It's very clear that both the United States and NATO have gone all in on standing with Ukraine as this war settles into a grinding conflict in the east and the south, with Russia poised, perhaps with this declaration of war we've been talking about on for the last 24 hours or so, with a much increased number of troops and continued bombardment, trying to claim more territory, trying to identify more parts of Ukraine as independent through sham elections. So the United States is supporting Ukraine. The president is going to demonstrate that support by going to Alabama. He's also showing the American people their own stake in this conflict, showing that the Americans are participating through the manufacture of these weapons. It also has ramifications for the United States economy because of the jobs that are created at plants of this kind. But no, the president is going to underscore the depth of the American commitment with this trip today.
All right, John Harwood, thank you so very much for that update. We're going to a short break. More Connect the World right after this. Stay with CNN.
This is CNN Breaking News.
And you're watching Connect the World to stories of survival and terror now in Ukraine. Some Mariupol evacuees have been recounting the horrors of the Russian bombardment of the Azovstal steel plant, and they'd been trapped there for more than 2 months. And some upbeat news coming in. Civilians evacuated from the steel plant in Mariupol have arrived in Zaporizhia. CNN's team witnessed emotional scenes earlier. And at the same time, US and other Western officials are sounding the alert about this coming Monday. And that's because they think a formal declaration of war by Vladimir Putin is looming as soon as May 9th. And that day is known as Victory Day in Russia, commemorating its defeat of the Nazis in 1945. Now, a formal declaration would enable the full mobilization of Russia's reserve forces. Russian President Vladimir Putin could move to formally declare war on Ukraine as soon as May 9th, and that's according to US and Western officials who say that would allow for the full mobilization of Russia's reserve forces as they try to conquer eastern and southern Ukraine. And as we've mentioned, it's Victory Day. May 9th is important for Russia, and it commemorates Russia's defeat of the Nazis. Katie Bo Ellis now joins us from Washington. Katie Bo, really good to see you. I mean, Vladimir Putin has had this sort of nostalgia about the past, specifically important moments in history. For everyone else, this has been a war, but it's semantics, clearly, for Vladimir Putin, and moving from what it would be now, what he calls a special military operation, to a potential war. Would that have real ramifications on the ground?
It certainly could. Now, it's important to understand that U.S. and Western officials aren't making a specific prediction here, right? They're saying that this is one possibility of what could happen on May 9th, not that they have hard intelligence that, yes, absolutely, on May 9th, Russian President Vladimir Putin is going to make this announcement. Officials have long suspected that he may try to use the symbolic date of May 9th to announce some kind of propaganda victory, to perhaps say, oh, look, I've achieved our war aims, and even potentially use that as an off-ramp to the conflict. Now, officials increasingly believe that, in fact, he may move to escalate on May 9th by announcing a formal declaration of war on Ukraine. Now, what would this mean? What would this mean practically? There's two sort of implications here that I think Putin might expect or might hope to get out of such an announcement. One of them is just the rally around the flag effort, right? Like it's his opportunity to kind of try to get the Russian population prepared for some long-term costs of this conflict, whether it's from the economic sanctions and the bite that those are beginning to have that have been directed on Russia by the West, or whether it is preparing the population for the loss of their sons, of their brothers, of their fathers headed off to war. The other practical implication here, that if this does happen as some believe that it now might, that Putin might expect to get out of this declaration, is the possibility that he could get more manpower for his conflict in Ukraine. Remember, the Russians have lost an enormous number of troops in this conflict. U.S. and Western officials estimate that as many as 10,000 Russian troops have been lost in the first stage of Putin's war. That's a lot of soldiers that Russia now has to try to backfill. And so this declaration could usher in draft conscriptions and mass mobilization of reserve forces, which would be an important thing.
All right, Katie Bo, thank you very much. We would like to go back to our breaking news story. We have people and evacuees arriving from the Azovstal steel plant from Mariupol into Zaporizhia. It's been a 2-day effort to get the evacuees to where you are, Nick Payton-Walsh. We've been hearing from you some of the emotional stories and experiences. What have you learned since we last spoke?
Yeah, look, there's a clear outpouring of relief amongst people here. And when we first saw part of the 106 evacuees from Azovstal coming off the buses, we did in fact meet them. So I think she's being helped over there now. A woman in her 70s called Olga, and just catching up with her inside here, where people are, as you can see, being given foods, a chance to sit down after 2 days for many of them on the road, possibly longer in some cases. Talking to Olga, it was clear that, and the two people with her, Vladimir and Victoria, essentially acquaintances from their experience trapped in Azovstal, they talked about how there had been food, how there had not been that many injured people trapped under there with them, but just the sheer terror, frankly, of, you can see some relief there in some of the younger people emerging here, the sheer terror of the explosions overhead constantly had been so hard for them. Olga in her 70s was deeply concerned because she had injured her leg and was concerned for fending for herself in the coming weeks. People here are now going to have to start their lives again from scratch because they fled their home city of Mariupol and then seen over the past 2 months how it's been destroyed, emerging only, some of them recognizable from video put around by the Ukrainian government of them emerging from the rubble. They emerged to see the damage that had been done, having not been aware of the extent of that because they were underground for quite so long. But this first convoy of 106 emerging through emerging through here, deeply important because of the hopes in it that mechanism fostered by the United Nations and Red Cross here, you can see in their distinctive blue the UN moving around to assisting people. The hope had been that mechanism might be able to get some of the 100,000 or so civilians still thought to be inside Mariupol out, and out at a larger volume. But while the people we've spoken to here talk of a relatively benign Russian presence at the multiple checkpoints they've passed through, probably because they were with the United Nations and Red Cross, there are, of course, I think, fears that this took, just to get this 106 out, 2 days, it seems. There may have been for technicalities that have now been resolved, but there had been a hope that this 106 would, as they moved, brought other civilians trying to flee along with them and grow into a larger number. That did not happen, and instead we got 5 buses, no civilian cars accompanying them, arriving out here. So scenes certainly here of relief, but also people from a town that was peaceful and living in disbelief just 3 months ago, and now in ruins with their lives. They're going to have to be rebuilt in the days ahead.
Nick, I can't help but notice, children waving at you and the camera and, them eating. I can feel there's some sort of relief. And just thinking about how the children are the most vulnerable that were stuck in the steel plant with very little resources, little food and water and no sunlight. Such an incredibly harrowing experience for these evacuees, and to think there are more that have been left behind.
Yes, and we don't know the precise number of those who are yet to get out. We think it may be 100, in the hundreds. Certainly one of the women I spoke to said there were 17 children that she was aware of under Azovstal, but these are numbers incomplete, many of them in the dark. One, Olga, the woman in her 70s we spoke to, clear that she was wearing a head torch just to provide herself light that was hanging around her neck at that point. But yeah, you can see here families experiencing the normality of sitting at a table and just drinking a cup of coffee or tea for the first time in quite a while, and clear relief. Eleni?
Yeah, emotional scenes, Nick. Thank you so very much for bringing us the story. Much appreciated. We're going to a short break and we'll be right back after this. Stay with us. It's one of the nights where the clothes are more important than who is wearing them. The Met Gala is a celebration of American design and glamour. The theme was the Gilded Age, and actress Blake Lively wowed the crowd with a bronze and rose gold. Her inspiration is said to be the Statue of Liberty. Another creation turning heads was worn by media personality Kim Kardashian. She was wearing one of the Marilyn Monroe's most iconic dresses, and the dress she wore when singing Happy Birthday to President John F. Kennedy 60 years ago. Getting into that dress was not easy.
They came with like armed guards and gloves, and I tried it on and it didn't fit me. And so I looked at them and I said, give me like 3 weeks. And I had to lose 16 pounds down today to be able to fit this, but it was such a challenge. It was like a roll.
Right.
I was determined. Yeah, I was determined to fit it.
Important determination to get into a dress. Okay, so the Gilded Age term was inspired by writer Mark Twain in the 1800s. It refers to a society covering its flaws under newly made fortunes. And tonight we will learn who one of the Champions League finalists will be. Liverpool take on Villarreal in Spain with an important 2-goal lead built up from the first leg. World Sport anchor Alex Thomas joins me now. Is there a chance Villarreal can turn this around?
I mean, there's always a chance, Eleni. We've seen some really surprising things, especially in cup football, knockout football. But Liverpool certainly the bookies' favourites to win later on Tuesday. And the same with Manchester City on Wednesday, which would give us a third All-English final in the space of 4 years. We'll have more on that coming up.
All right, Alex, we're going to a short break, and when we come back, more World Sports. Stay with CNN.
Hello, welcome to CNN World Sport. I'm Alex Thomas in London. We start with some breaking news surrounding WNBA star Brittney Griner, who's essentially been under arrest in Russia since February. Let's cross to Andy Scholes at CNN Center. There's been a major development in this story, Andy.
Yes, there has, Alex. A State Department official has confirmed to CNN Tuesday that the U.S. State Department has now classified Brittney Griner as wrongfully detained in Russia. And her case is being handled by the Office of the U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs. And that office leads and coordinates the government's diplomatic efforts aimed at securing the release of Americans wrongfully detained abroad. They played a major role in securing the release of Trevor Reed from Russia last week. Now, Griner has been in Russian custody since mid-February when she was detained for allegedly bringing vape cartridges containing cannabis oil into the country. Now, the reclassification of Griner means that the U.S. government will no longer wait for Griner's case to play out through the Russian legal system and will seek to negotiate her return. Now, in the meantime, the WNBA season starts on Friday, and the league announcing Tuesday morning that Brittney Griner's initials and jersey number 42 will be featured along the sideline of all 12 WNBA courts. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert, in a statement, said, "We continue to work on bringing Brittany home and are appreciative of the support the community has shown BG and her family during this extraordinarily challenging time." Alex Greiner, for now, is scheduled to have a hearing in Russian court on May 19th.
Okay, Andy, let's move on to the NBA playoffs. Wins for the Miami Heat and Phoenix Suns on Monday. The Suns particularly impressive in game one of their conference semifinal series against the Mavericks.
Yeah, I mean, they certainly were. The Suns just continue to impress everyone. You know, Chris Paul has this offense firing on all cylinders. They've shot 50% or better in all 7 playoff games. That's the second longest streak in NBA history. And Phoenix just pouncing on Dallas from the start in game one. Devin Booker moving much better in his second game back from that hamstring injury. He scored 23. Now, Luka Doncic did everything he could to keep the Mavs in this game. He had 45 points, 12 rebounds, and 8 assists. But it wasn't enough. The Suns led this game wire to wire. They would go on to win 121-114. Phoenix has now beaten Dallas 10 straight times.
To see the way the guys on our team work day in and day out, you knew it was bound to happen, but that's one game. You know, we got to, let this one go, get ready for game 2.
But I don't think the offense was the problem today. I think on defensive end, I think everybody was just a little bit lazy, especially on the first half. We got to change that.
All right, the 76ers, meanwhile, playing without star center Joel Embiid, who's out indefinitely with an orbital fracture and concussion. Tyler Hero on fire off the bench for Miami in game one. He poured in 25 points, and then Bam Adebayo just dominating inside without Embiid around. He scored 24. Miami won game one easily, 106-92. The Sixers in a really tough spot. You know, game 2 on Wednesday, almost going to be a must-win, even if they get Embiid back in game 3. If they go down 0-2, tough to imagine the Sixers beating the Heat 4 out of 5 games. And Alex, the playoffs continue Tuesday night. You've got the Bucks and Celtics, Boston trying to even that series at a game apiece. And then you got the Warriors and Grizzlies playing game 2. John Morant and the Grizzlies really don't want to go down 0-2 to the Golden State Warriors, as that series would shift to California for game 3.
Yeah, that game 1 was tight. Maybe the same in game 2. Could be exciting. Andy Scholes, thank you, Andy.
Right.
Now to Formula One, which is gearing up for a huge week as it looks to expand further into the American sports market. The PR blitz already underway ahead of its first ever Grand Prix in Miami. Lewis Hamilton appearing on US Breakfast Show, Good Morning America, to talk about how he's trying to increase diversity in the sport and reveal his love of skydiving. The 7-time world champion may have ruled himself out of the title race this season, but is still enthusiastic about getting the States to fall even more in love with the sport.
It's a bit nerve-wracking because I think it's going to be such a huge event for us. We obviously have the race in Austin, Texas, which has always been amazing. First race I had out here was Indianapolis in 2007. But now, you know, with Netflix, the Netflix series Drive to Survive growing, now we have 2 Grand Prix in the States and then potentially another one. We have another one in Vegas next year. Wow. So it's going to be huge.
And we're going to be live from that inaugural Miami Formula One Grand Prix later this week. And also stay tuned for what are some exciting interviews coming your way in the days ahead. Okay, we're barely more than 24 hours away from knowing who will contest this season's Champions League final. We're going to focus on Liverpool in a moment as they look to move a step closer to football history. Hello, welcome back. Liverpool are strong favourites to be the first team into this season's Champions League final and move another step closer to what would be an historic haul of 4 major trophies. Jurgen Klopp's men leading 2-0, heading into the second leg of their semi-final match against Villarreal in Spain. If they reach the final, it'll give them a chance to add the Champions League to the English League Cup they won earlier this season. They're already through to the FA Cup final as well and trail Manchester City by a point at the top of the Premier League. Our senior sports analyst, Darren Lewis, says Liverpool's aim will be to stick to the formula that's brought them to the brink of history.
If they can complete the job against Villarreal tonight, they'll be into the final of the Champions League, and they'll be within a handful of games of being able to pull off an achievement that would mark them down as surely the greatest team in Premier League history, maybe even English football history. And the noisier it will get, the closer they get to that milestone. And just to give you some context, around what they are trying to achieve this season, since it first became achievable way back in 1960, around 120 other teams have tried. Well, 15 clubs have tried. There have been 120 attempts. And some teams have managed to win 2 of the 4. Some teams have managed to win 3 of the 4, but no team has managed all 4 in the same season. And that's what Liverpool are up against. But Jurgen Klopp, he's been really trying to manage his players. He's been taking them in and out of games prematurely. Sometimes you see them coming off none too happy. But he knows what they're trying to achieve. They are buying into, ultimately, what the club is trying to achieve, and that's why the excitement is building massively.
You're right, Darren. And of course, the Liverpool manager, understandably reluctant in public to discuss the quadruple. Perhaps the closest he got in Monday's pre-match press conference was just merely to acknowledge what superb form they're in right now. Let's take a listen.
The thing with all these things during the season, obviously in the situation we are, it's clear we must have done something right in the last few weeks and months. That's clear. But the problem in our job is everything perfect until this moment. I'm sitting here, and the next game we start on the wrong foot or whatever, and all of a sudden the game gets a difficult or a different dynamic and all these kind of things. And now, so it's good to know, and it gives it's more a feeling inside. It's not that we are flying constantly and high five here and there, but we know we are in a good moment. That's true.
So, Darren, they're not going around high fiving each other, but the fans certainly are. Do you think this Liverpool team has already etched its name in history to some extent, no matter what happens later?
Absolutely, Alex. I mean, to the point I made earlier, they are just so entertaining to watch. I remember when Jurgen Klopp came to the club in 2015, he promised a high-intensity brand of football, similar to the style of play his teams had at Dortmund. And lots of people believed it couldn't be done. They felt that you couldn't do it in the toughest league in the world, and yet they are still a joy to watch week in, week out, 7 years later. That's why so many of us will be watching tonight to see if they can finish the job against Villarreal in Spain.
I mean, you can see why he's nervous, can't you? Because they talk about being in the zone in lots of sports. It's very hard to do that consistently, week after week, month after month. Listen, as for this particular Champions League semi-final second leg later on Tuesday, the usual caveats apply about not taking their opponents lightly. Do you think Villarreal stand a chance of recovering from 2-0 down, or has their victory simply been to get this far?
Well, we've seen so many comebacks in this competition over the last few years that we now know in the Champions League, it is never over until it's over. Villarreal beat Bayern Munich, remember, at home this season, put Juventus out of the competition in the previous round. They may have lost at the weekend to Alaves, but that was away from home. At their own stadium, they are undefeated, Alex, since the end of November. So yes, Liverpool do have the edge, but I do think there's quite a bit of football left to play in this tie. And I really don't want to even try to predict it, because we've seen over the years in football, anything can happen.
Fair to say predictions would be a bit foolish at this stage. Darren Lewis speaking to us earlier there. Meanwhile, here in England on Monday, Manchester United's final home game of the Premier League season ended with a win. Bruno Fernandes, Cristiano Ronaldo and Rafael Varane with the goals in a 3-0 victory over Brentford. Despite that, they'll almost certainly miss out on Champions League football next season. This probably the last Old Trafford appearance for many departing players. ahead of what will be a major rebuild by the incoming manager Erik ten Hag. And not for the first time, Ronnie O'Sullivan has rewritten snooker's record books after winning his 7th World Championship. Nicknamed the Rocket for his speedy pace of play, O'Sullivan claimed the title by beating Judd Trump 18 frames to 13. Age 46, Rocket Ronnie's the oldest ever champion and has now equalled Stephen Hendry's modern-day record of 7 world titles. Afterwards, Trump called him the best player of all time, and it sounds like O'Sullivan isn't finished there.
I've loved every tournament this year, even the ones down at Leicester, because it's under the radar and I just love playing. This has just brought out the worst in me, to be honest with you. I've detached emotionally for the last 7-8 years. I do treat every tournament like a training camp. I do my gym, do my running, I eat good food. You know, I like to win, but it's not the be and end all. I love competing with the guys, I love being around the guys, but this just brings out the worst in me. So I don't know if it's a good idea, but we'll probably go again next year, because I'm glad.
And Eleni, you can hear how popular Ronnie O'Sullivan is with the fans. He's going to come back next year to defend his title. Snooker is a lot harder than he makes it look, I can guarantee.
Yeah. I love the honesty, though, I have to say. All right, Alex, thanks so much. Good to see you. We're going to a short break and more Connect the World right after this. Stay with CNN.
This is CNN Breaking News.
I'm Eleni Jokos in Abu Dhabi. I'm in for my colleague Becky Anderson. Welcome to Connect the World. Now, after months hiding out underground and days spent on a dangerous journey, a convoy of Ukrainian evacuees has finally made it to safety in Zaporizhia. You saw it live here on Connect the World last hour. Evacuees getting off those buses. The convoy had carried 106 people who managed to get out of Mariupol's Azovstal steel plant over the weekend. CNN's Nick Payton-Walsh is in Zaporizhia. He's on the ground. He's been covering the experiences of some of these evacuees, and we'll go to him shortly. But back in Mariupol, the mayor says the Azovstal steel plant remains under heavy Russian attack. Video from Reuters shows Russian rockets fired at the plant. CNN is not in Mariupol. While hundreds still remain holed up inside the plant, the mayor says tens of thousands of others are enduring dire conditions, with some being forced to dig mass graves to bury the dead. Nick Payton-Walsh is in Zaporizhia for us. Nick, you have been waiting. It has been an incredible journey, just waiting to see when people would finally arrive from the Azovstal plant. You've spoken to some people. What are they telling you?
Yeah, I've actually just had an extraordinary conversation with the mother of Sviatoslav. Now, that may not mean much to you unless you saw the video of the first evacuees to emerge from the rubble of the Azovstal steel plant. Sviatoslav turned 6 months the day before he emerged in that video and had spent a third of his life underground in that basement. Just been talking to his mother, a French teacher, half the conversation we had in French and English, and extraordinary courage, but talking about, frankly, how it had been so hard to find anything to smile about, but even still, how soldiers in that basement had managed to bring to her diapers for her child, and dealing with the complexity of what on earth is she going to tell this son of hers, who from the age of 4 months to 6 months has been under this bombardment. And she said for her, the scariest noise now is an airplane, because that is the delivery mechanism Russia had for the explosions that landed on top of the factory where they were hiding. And she hopes that eventually one day she may become able to hear an airplane's noise again and not be quite so terrified, but is deeply concerned about that. And a number of stories emerging inside of this tent, to Olga in her 70s, who we spoke to, injured in her left ankle, concerned about her ability to fend for herself moving forwards. A lot of help, though, from NGOs and charity organisations here, the United Nations, the Red Cross, also Ukrainian NGO as well here, to be sure people have some kind of assistance as they move forwards here. But it's a scene of relief in there. It's a scene of, frankly, getting the first cup of coffee you may have had in a while. It's a scene of, for Olga, asking for us if we had any chocolate we could give her, which we fortunately did. Talking also, too, though, to the people inside the basement. Stories, certainly, or a great admiration for the Ukrainian armed forces, who are not only fending off the Russian onslaught, but still providing food to those people caught inside that basement. Delaney, sorry, I heard you talking there.
Yeah. Yeah, I was smiling, you know, I was thinking it's the simple things like chocolate that people will miss. You know, it's things that we take for granted, and it's incredibly moving to hear the stories that you're sharing with us. We actually saw images of women with her baby, and it's also heartwarming to see kids running around behind you, that perhaps they have a better future and some kind of hope. But Nick, I have to say, you've been covering these, you know, harrowing escapes from Mariupol, and they're fragile. The deals that are made between the Russians and the Ukrainians, sometimes they fall apart. What do we know in terms of trying to keep these corridors open?
Yeah, I mean, the hope had been, Eleni, that this first batch of evacuees might have created a mechanism that could be used to increase the volume. Remember, there were 100,000 people in Mariupol, civilians, facing imminently disease, frankly, as an escalating threat, but also Russian occupation, shelling as well. So much that threatens their lives. The hope had been that this would be a way to get them first 100 out from the Azovstal plant. We just have to move away from one of the buses here that's going to arrive to take away some of these evacuees. I understand they might be going to a hotel initially, but this is all part of the, as best as they could, choreographed operation that so many organisations have been involved in here. I mean, they first of all had to get people out of Azovstal. That was something the Ukrainian military were assistive with, and then subsequently had to get them through countless Russian checkpoints. Talking to a couple inside there, Vladimir and Victoria, they actually said that their journey didn't seem to have been spoiled so much by the Russians. They let them through, but that may be because of the United Nations and the Red Cross. And that essentially had been the hope, that the UN and Red Cross would create this mechanism. It would be able to move fast to get a volume of individuals out. But people here just delighted to be able to have their first time to sit down and rest. Прошу прощения. Нормально? You're okay? Как вас зовут? Victoria Dmitria, this is Victoria. Some Mariupola. Polodny. Polonsky rайон, хорошо. She's from the nearby area. We should leave her to catch her breath there, I think, probably. А как вас зовут? Можно поспрашивать? Руслан. Понятно. А ну, как его зовут? Большой. Облачко. Понятно. Странно. I'm just saying that's Облачко, her pet there. I'm just saying it's quite a strange animal, but we'll find out what that is later. Anyway, Eleni, back to you. Sorry.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I'm smiling, and it's interesting because we're seeing smiles right now, but underneath those smiles, Nick, I can't imagine the uncertainty, the fear, the concern about what the future holds. And you've mentioned this so many times because people have had to leave their lives, their livelihoods, their entire existence has been upended and have been catapulted into a new reality, one which, you know, is going to be vastly different to what they're used to and what they've built for so many years.
Look, February 22nd, Mariupol was a peaceful town. For most reporting, which suggested had no real credence that Russia would launch an invasion in the way that it did, or that its world would be facing the brunt of Russian firepower. It was always on the road, frankly, for Russia's ambition to create a land corridor between the areas that it occupied, held by separatists on the Crimean Peninsula. But I don't think anybody imagined this sort of ferocity we visited upon them. And people here have had to deal with that change, their country being at war, their city being the focus of so much of the fighting, and then their lives being destroyed as they flee, in these cases, into Azovstal, into that bunker for 2 months of darkness. And there was water, apparently, quite a bit of it down there, but intermittent food. And now emerging in the videos that we saw in the last 48 hours to see this city utterly ruined and destroyed, occupied by Russians who, for so many in Mariupol, were, you know, people have links to Russian families. This is not an alien country, but this war has totally altered all of that for so many. And now dealing with the fact they've emerged from all of those challenges to hear the good news, and now they have to rebuild their lives from scratch. And there are resettlement programs. There does appear to be a hotel where many of these people are going to now, but still, the changes people have gone through here are just startling. I can't imagine how they would digest or process that. Eleni?
Yeah, it's really difficult to hear and see. And I remember we were talking over the time when the attack started on Mariupol, and you were telling us it's an industrial city, it's a port city, it has vital importance, and to see it being in this situation is distraughting. You know, it actually creates an enormous amount of pain. Nick, thank you so much. We'll catch up with you later, but really appreciate the work you're doing for us on the ground. Russia's defense ministry has released a video that claims to show civilians from Mariupol arriving in a Russian-controlled town. And keep this in mind. This is what Russia wants the world to see. Its defense ministry says more than 1 million Ukrainians have been evacuated into Russian-controlled territory, but it's impossible to verify that number or know how many of them went there willingly. Now to our other top story this hour, the seismic change possibly coming to U.S. abortion law. A draft version of a Supreme Court opinion published by Politico reveals the court may be poised to overturn a 1973 ruling ensuring the right to abortion. It is an emotional issue in the United States, and demonstrations for and against the move erupted almost immediately. Roe versus Wade is one of the most well-known decisions of the U.S. Supreme Court. The court ruled that state laws forbidding abortions are unconstitutional and placed limits on state regulations of abortion. And the case was filed in the state of Texas by a woman going by the pseudonym Jane Roe against Henry Wade, the district attorney in Dallas County who enforced Texas law. In a statement, U.S. President Joe Biden called a woman's right to have an abortion fundamental, and he urged to voters to elect officials who will support abortion rights. Joining us now to discuss all of this is CNN legal analyst Ellie Hoening, as well as White House correspondent Jeremy Diamond. Ellie, I want to start with you, and I want to bring to the attention for our audience to understand this particular passage of Alito's draft opinion. This is one of the justices. It says, And I'd like to quote this. Roe, however, was remarkably loose in its treatment of the constitutional text. It held that the abortion right, which is not mentioned in the Constitution, is part of a right to privacy, which is also not mentioned. And it goes on to criticize that the right to privacy springs from a number of constitutional amendments. What impact could, of course, now this have in terms of limiting of rights to privacy on other rulings? And of course, this is such an important question here, because it basically says this is not the law of the land. Could you give us some insight into this?
Yeah, Lainey. So this is really all about the constitutional right to privacy. As Justice Alito notes, the word privacy doesn't appear verbatim in the Constitution. However, starting back in the 1960s, the U.S. Supreme Court began to recognize under the 14th Amendment due process clause a right to privacy in a person's sexual relations, marital relations inside the home. And perhaps the best known of those decisions was Roe versus Wade, which said essentially the states cannot prohibit a woman from getting an abortion. And so the criticism that you hear from Justice Alito in this draft opinion is that the right to privacy is not specifically stated in the Constitution, nor is the right to an abortion. However, there are many rights that have been recognized by the Constitution, even if they're not in the exact text of the Constitution itself.
Jeremy, I want to bring you in here, and President Joe Biden has weighed in and importantly said this is, of course, this ruling hasn't happened yet and things could have changed. But he was very vocal about the risks and also the potential steps that can be taken.
Yeah, look, even before this draft opinion was published by Politico, President Biden has been warning about what he says is an assault on women's right to choose to get an abortion. And he has been preparing for this day. And the president saying in a statement, "We do not know whether this draft is genuine or whether it reflects the final decision of the court." He says, "I believe that a woman's right to choose is fundamental. Roe has been the law of the land for almost 50 years, and basic fairness and the stability of our law demand that it not be overturned." The president also saying that his administration, as I mentioned, has already been preparing for this possibility and has been looking at what kinds of federal tools it could potentially use in the event that Roe versus Wade is overturned. They've been doing that also as several states across the country have in recent months passed laws that restricted women's access to abortion services in several states across the country. The president also in this statement making a fundamental point, which is that this is now going to become a central issue in the midterms, particularly for Democrats who are going to look to galvanize their voters to get out to the polls. And it could potentially help Democrats who have been facing stiff odds heading into these midterms, the probability of losing the House, the possibility of losing the Senate as well. Now this could potentially change that equation somewhat, particularly if this decision does indeed come down this summer. President Biden making very clear that, look, Democrats do not currently have the numbers to codify Roe versus Wade through legislation as the law of the land, but he says that this is why it's up to voters in November to elect pro-choice officials, and his hope is that it can ultimately be codified through legislation.
Elia, I'd like to ask you in terms of the immediate impact. And while we're still waiting to hear what the final decision will be, you've seen many people go to the streets and voice their concerns because, and we just saw that heat map in terms of the states that are ready and waiting to trigger their own laws.
Yeah, well, it's important. First of all, the impact will be seismic here. There's no question about it. It's important to understand, though, if this decision ends up getting issued as we've seen it, that does not mean abortion will be illegal across the United States. That means it will be up to each individual state to decide. Now, you've seen the heat maps shows that somewhere around half the states either have laws that go into effect immediately as soon as Roe versus Wade is overturned, or essentially will go back to the old state where they made abortion illegal. However, the effect could be even broader than that because some states have laws that make it illegal to travel to go get an abortion, to finance an abortion. So this will have an enormous impact. Essentially, it will leave it up to each individual state, but it will change the face of the nation.
Yeah, it'll cause incredible restrictions for women wanting to terminate pregnancies. Thank you to both of you for your insights. Now, on the date, we thought that Vladimir Putin might declare victory. He could instead declare war. And a state where Jews sought refuge after World War II, accused of supporting a neo-Nazi regime in Ukraine. Russia doubles down on its accusations. Coming up after this break. More now on our breaking news. A convoy of Ukrainian civilians evacuated from Mariupol's Azovstal steel plant has arrived in the Ukrainian-controlled city of Zaporizhia. Some of youngest and oldest among those who had been trapped inside the plant exited the buses, as you can see there, and they had looks of relief and even bewilderment. A normally short journey took a few days as the convoy moved slowly through Russian-controlled territory, encountering what Ukrainian officials called Russian obstacles along the way. In Britain, Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced a new $376 million aid package for Ukraine and praised its war effort as President Volodymyr Zelensky watched remotely in Kyiv, the Prime Minister invoking words used by Winston Churchill during World War II. Take a listen.
You have exploded the myth of Putin's invincibility, and you've written one of the most glorious chapters in military history and in the life of your country. The so-called irresistible force of Putin's war machine has broken on the immovable object of Ukrainian patriotism and love of country. This is Ukraine's finest hour.
And also today, the French president said that Emmanuel Macron and Russian President Vladimir Putin talked on the phone for more than 2 hours. The Kremlin says Putin told Mr. Macron that he is still open to dialogue. President Putin could move now to formally declare war on Ukraine as soon as May 9th. That's according to US and Western officials who say that would allow for the full mobilization of Russia's reserve forces as they try to conquer eastern and southern Ukraine. May 9th is known as Victory Day in Russia, and it commemorates Russia's defeat of the Nazis in 1945. Scott McLean is in Lviv, Ukraine for us, and we'll get more from him in just a moment. But we also have Natasha Bertrand joining us from Washington. Natasha, good to see you. Look, the Russian president is already at war. He's just calling it something else. It's semantics for him. So why now the formal declaration?
That's right. So as we know, the Russians have been describing this as a special military operation, and they have said that a central goal of this operation has been to denazify Ukraine. And of course, that is a lie that the Russians have told in order to justify this operation to their population. Now, what we're told from U.S. and Western officials is that on May 9th, which is that Victory Day commemorating the Russians' defeat of the Nazis, it is possible that President Putin declares a formal war on Ukraine, which would be important symbolically, and it would also be important logistically. Symbolically, because, of course, it would allow him to tell the population, look, we're now declaring this formal war on the Nazis, of course, a lie that he has told to the population, and that could galvanize public opinion even further for this conflict. But logistically, it would also be very important because it would allow the Russian president to mobilize the full reserves, the full Russian reserve force, and that is important because they are facing a real shortage of manpower as they try to wage this new phase of the conflict in eastern Ukraine. It would also allow him to draft conscripts. It is unclear how effective those conscripts would actually be at this point in the war. They can't serve very long. It's pretty much up to a year that they can serve, but still, this could be a way for him to kind of boost the forces there in eastern Ukraine. Now, this is not the only thing that the U.S. and Western officials are watching for. They also believe that May 9th could bring another escalation of hostilities, including the annexation of the Luhansk and Donetsk regions in eastern Ukraine. And here is what the ambassador to the OSCE said yesterday about this.
According to the most recent reports, we believe that Russia will try to annex the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic, in quotes, so-called, to Russia. The reports state that Russia has plans to engineer referenda on joining Russia sometime in mid-May, and that Moscow is considering a similar plan for Kherson.
So the bottom line here is that Russia, U.S. and Western officials believe, needs a victory on May 9th, needs something in order to continue justifying this operation to the Russian population. Of course, they have faced extremely numerous difficulties in this war, and it does not seem to be getting any better for them, Eleni.
Natasha Bertrand, thank you so very much. We also have Scott McLean in Ukraine for us, in Lviv. Scott, you know, hearing what the anticipation is in terms of the announcement on May the 9th, if you believe what they say in terms of Putin will announce, you know, full declaration of war, which basically could mean that his full military might and wrath hasn't actually been deployed in Ukraine as yet. Are you hearing that that is a worry, that the aggression and escalation could occur after that date?
Yeah, so if there were a formal declaration of war, Eleni, it would give President Putin the power to formally implement a draft, call up reservists, which may well bolster the troop counts in eastern Ukraine, which surely would help. American estimates were that before the war, there was about 110,000 or so Russian troops surrounding Ukraine. At the moment, the most recent numbers that we have are roughly 85,000 or so estimated to be inside the country, maybe 20,000 waiting outside the country, just outside of the border. Now, a military leader, a Ukrainian military leader in the east of the country, says that the Russians have found it quite difficult to take towns and villages on the ground using regular manpower, and so what they've resorted to instead is airstrikes and heavy shelling, essentially flattening these towns and forcing the Ukrainians to retreat, whereas they could otherwise hold that piece of ground, but they wouldn't want to take the heavy troop losses, and so they retreat instead. Just today, the Ukrainians say that 9 civilians were killed in artillery strikes across the Donetsk region. Ukraine also says that it's fighting back. It's managed to repel 12 attacks in the last 24 hours, including bringing down 7 different drones. The Ukrainians say that Russians are now bringing some heavy equipment out of storage to bring it to the front lines to
I'm going to interrupt you there. I'm going to take our viewers to Base Andrews, where President Joe Biden is speaking. Let's listen.
He's going to vote for it. I hope there are not enough votes for it. It's the main reason why I worked so hard to keep Robert Bork off the court. It reflects his view almost word. Anyway, look, the idea that it concerns me a great deal that we're going to, after 50 years, decide a woman does not have a right to choose within the limits of the Supreme Court decision in Casey, number one. But even equally as profound as the rationale used. Right. And it would mean that every other decision relating to the notion of privacy is thrown into question. I realize this goes back a long way, but one of the debates I had with Robert Bork was whether Griswold versus Connecticut should stand as law. The state of Connecticut said that the privacy of your bedroom, a husband and wife or a couple could not choose to use contraception. To use the contraception was a violation of the law. If the rationale of the decision as released were to be sustained, a whole range of rights are in question. A whole range of rights. And the idea we're letting the states make those decisions, localities make those decisions, would be a fundamental shift in what we've done. So it goes far beyond, in my view, if it becomes a law and if what is written is what remains. It goes far beyond the concern of whether or not there is the right to choose. It goes to other basic rights, the right to marry, the right to determine a whole range of things. Because one of the issues that this court, many of the members of the court, a number of the members of the court, have not acknowledged is that there is a right to privacy in our Constitution. I strongly believe there is. I think the decision in Griswold was correct overruling it. I think the decision in Roe was correct because there's a right to privacy. There can be limitations on it, but it cannot be denied.
Do you think this leak has irreparably changed the court? Do you think that this leak has irreparably changed the court? We've never seen this happen before.
Well, you know, if this decision holds, it's really quite a radical decision. And again, the underlying premise, and again, I've not had a chance to thoroughly go into the report, the decision. But it basically says all the decisions relating to your private life, who you marry, whether or not you decide to conceive a child or not, whether or not you can have an abortion, a range of other decisions, whether or not how you raise your child. What does this do? And does this mean that in Florida they can decide they're going to pass a law saying that same-sex marriage is not permissible? It's against the law in Florida. So there's a whole, it's a fundamental shift in American jurisprudence.
On the filibuster, Francis, instead of do away with the filibuster to codify Roe?
I'm not prepared to make those judgments now about, but you know, I think the codification of Roe makes a lot of sense. Look, think what Roe says. Roe says what all basic mainstream religions have historically concluded, that the existence of a human life and being is a question. Is it at the moment of conception? Is it 6 months? Is it 6 weeks? Is it quickening, like Aquinas argued? I mean, so the idea that we're going to make a judgment that is going to say that no one can make the judgment to choose to abort a child based on a decision by the Supreme Court, I think goes way overboard.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
What does this mean for the midterms? What does this mean for the Democrats' argument in the midterms?
I haven't thought that through yet.
Do changes need to be made to the court in light of this, if this decision holds?
I beg your pardon?
Do changes need to be made to the court in light of this, if this decision
No, we just have to choose it. I mean, look, one of the reasons why I voted against a number of the members in the court, they refused to acknowledge that there's a Ninth Amendment. They refused to acknowledge there's a right to privacy. I mean, there's so many fundamental rights that are affected by that, and I'm not prepared to leave that to the whims and of the public at the moment in local areas. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Come on, guys.
Right, President Joe Biden commenting on the draft opinion by the Supreme Court. Of course, we don't know if it is going to come through. But he says that if it is sustained, and of course this is the draft opinion about overturning the Roe versus Wade precedent that was set 49 years ago, he says that if it is sustained, it is going to have far-reaching ramifications, more than just focusing on whether a woman has a right to choose to terminate a pregnancy, but then it brings into question other privacy laws in terms of marriage or how to raise a child. He did not answer the question about the potential of a filibuster, but he did say that it just brings into question so many other precedents that have been set. This is an important moment. It could have huge implications for women's rights. It's a story we will be following very closely. President Joe Biden is on his way to Alabama to visit a Javelin manufacturing plant. We'll be following his moves as well. We're going to a very short break. More CNN after this. Stay with us. It's being called a stunning breach of Supreme Court confidentiality and secrecy, and it's sparking protests across the U.S. among abortion rights advocates and legal analysts. Politico has obtained what it calls a draft of Supreme Court opinion, suggesting the conservative majority may be about to outlaw the constitutional right to an abortion. Planned Parenthood, the organization that provides women's reproductive health care, tweeted, and I quote, "Let's be clear, this is a draft opinion. It's outrageous, it's unprecedented, but it's not final. Abortion is your right, and it is still legal." Supreme Court Chief Justice Roberts has issued a statement on that leak. He says, and I quote, "This was a singular and egregious breach of that trust that is an affront to the court and the community of public servants who work here. I have directed the marshal of the court to launch an investigation into the source of that leak. To the extent this betrayal of the confidences of the court was intended to undermine the integrity of our operations, it will not succeed." I want to now bring in Wendy Davis, former Democratic State Senator of Texas, who held a 13-hour filibuster to block a restrictive abortion bill back in 2013. Wendy, so good to have you on. Texas has some of the strictest abortion laws and frankly has been waiting for something like this to occur. When you read this draft opinion, what were your initial thoughts and what ramifications could it have for women in Texas?
Well, thank you so much for having me on. You know, my initial thoughts, I'm sure, were like those of so many people across this country. While we've been expecting this, to see these words written on paper, and I understand that this is a draft, but it seems as though 5 justices on the court are poised to overturn Roe v. Wade. And for them to pull away completely any protections embedded in the Constitution for these privacy rights on which Roe depended really is sobering, not only for what it will mean for reproductive rights, but what it will mean for other decisions, for example, marriage equality, which also find its underpinning in the privacy rights recognized for decades in the Constitution by the U.S. Supreme Court.
So, Wendy, we actually heard from President Joe Biden a short while ago, and he said, similar to what you're saying, that this could have far-reaching ramifications with regards to other privacy laws in terms of marriage or how you raise your children. And he actually mentioned quite a few. And he said, well, what are those going to be overturned as well? What does it mean for those precedents? So what kind of legal recourse would you say is at hand or perhaps available to specifically protect the right of a woman to terminate a pregnancy if she wishes to do so?
Well, if Roe is indeed overturned in late June as expected, the only way that women will be able to access legal abortion care in this country will be either through state legislative action to specifically allow it, or federal protections. Right now, the Women's Health Protection Act is before Congress. The House voted to pass it. The U.S. Senate has not voted to pass it. They haven't had the votes to do that. And if the federal level fails to codify the protections of Roe, we are going to be left in a country where more than half the states have said that they will make abortion illegal following the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And what that means is hard really to describe. 49 years of protection for abortion rights in this country will go away overnight for people in more or about half of our states here. And it's going to create a tremendously difficult dynamic where only people who have the privilege to afford to travel to receive abortion in states where it's allowed will be able to exercise that right. And we're going to see more and more marginalized people unable to access the right to safe and legal abortion.
Yeah, it is a scary thought. Wendy, you held a 13-hour filibuster to block a restrictive abortion law in Texas. President Biden did not answer when he was asked about a potential filibuster this time around. Do you think that this could potentially be an outcome?
I certainly hope so. I mean, I know as part of the November elections here across the country, this issue is going to be an important referendum on the ballot. Are we going to fight to protect this right, or are we not? And I expect that not only are Democrats going to be fully charged up and turn out in record numbers to vote, but I think independents and moderate Republicans who also support abortion rights, many of whom have continued to vote for Republican nominees who have said that they will overturn Roe, I think they just haven't believed it would really happen. And this sobering moment that we find ourselves in, I think will reveal a very different outcome in our November elections than we were expecting.
Yeah. Wendy Davis, thank you so very much. Great to have you on. People are returning to a village near Kyiv decimated by Russian attacks. Why things remain dangerous in Moshin weeks after a Russian retreat. We're coming to you right after the short break. Stay with us. Russia and Vladimir Putin have consistently made the false claim that Ukraine is riddled with Nazis. And now Russia has accused Israel of supporting a neo-Nazi regime in Kyiv. The comments doubled down on Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's assertion Monday that Hitler had Jewish blood. This was in an attempt to justify his claims that Ukraine is in the grips of neo-Nazis, despite President Volodymyr Zelensky being Jewish himself. Joining me now is CNN's Hadas Gold. Hadas, I have to say, Israel has been sort of trying to take a very diplomatic stance on this war, but the latest comments from Russia over a few days making it ever so hard for Israel to remain neutral here.
Yeah, it's kind of reached a new absurd level, accusing Israel of supporting a neo-Nazi regime in Kyiv. So yes, the Jewish state created in the aftermath of World War II, of the atrocities of the Nazis, of the Holocaust, somehow supporting neo-Nazis. The Russians also today released a 1,000-word document they said would claim their need to denazify a country with a Jewish president. It included examples of forced Jewish collaboration with the Nazis and contemporary instances of anti-Semitism in Ukraine. Yesterday, Israeli officials reacted very angrily to those initial comments from Sergei Lavrov, demanding an apology. The Russian ambassador was summoned for talks. So far today, we have not seen any sort of official reaction from the Prime Minister or the Foreign Minister to this latest absurd accusation that Israel is supporting a neo-Nazi regime. We did hear from the Health Minister, who is on the Israeli cabinet, who said there is no neo-Nazi regime in Ukraine. Zelensky is not a Nazi, and his Judaism is unrelated. He went on to say that the Russian rhetoric that connects the invasion of Ukraine to the Soviet struggle against Nazi Germany with comparisons to Hitler is a terrible lie. And you're right to mention that Israel has been in this sort of tricky diplomatic balancing act. While they have condemned the invasion, they've accused Russia of war crimes, they've been sending humanitarian aid to Ukraine, Israel has not yet gone so far as to join, for example, Western sanctions against Russia or sending military equipment to Ukraine. But yesterday, Foreign Minister Lapid did warn that while Israel had been trying to maintain good relations with Ukraine, Israel had been trying to act as a mediator between the two countries, that Russia had crossed the line with these statements and that they were demanding an apology. But whether this will actually push Israel any further, right now experts I've been speaking to say that as it stands, they don't think so. But if this escalates further, if, for example, Russia kicks out Israel's ambassador over this sort of rhetorical war of words, then we might see things change. Eleni.
Hadas Gold, thank you so very much. Now, some of the most devastating scenes from the war in Ukraine have come from towns around Kyiv, where Russian troops stormed in and then withdrew. CNN's Matt Rivers spoke to Ukrainians who are trying to pick up the pieces in a village virtually flattened by the brutal campaign.
At the entrance to the Ukrainian village of Moshun, an effigy twists in the breeze. A uniform stripped off a dead Russian soldier, stuffed and hung from a tree. People hate Russia here because of what it did. The tiny town northwest of Kyiv has been leveled. Russian bombs, rockets, bullets destroyed street after street after street. This was the site of some of the most intense fighting of the war so far. On their drive toward Kyiv, the Russians attacked soldiers and civilians alike here. Ukrainian bunkers alongside ordinary houses, shelled relentlessly to devastating effect.
This was probably somebody's kitchen. You can see there's a oven there, some pots and pans, a microwave. I mean, this isn't a big city, but the scale of destruction in this village is on par with anything else we've seen across Ukraine. I mean, this house gets hit with artillery, there's a subsequent fire, and just look, I mean, it's eviscerated. If there is a building in this village that hasn't been damaged in this fighting, we haven't seen it yet.
Boom, 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 fire, fire. It was everywhere. It's a nightmare.
Valentina Fursa has lived in Moshun for years and has never known war until it landed on her doorstep and forced her down into a neighbor's basement.
How scared were you?
We were very scared. My heart was beating very fast. We thought we would die there. The Russians fired indiscriminately.
The fighting only eased when Russia withdrew from the entire Kyiv region. Valentina, emerging from the basement, to find shell casings in her garden and whatever else the Russians left behind.
So all these things she says the Russians left behind. So this for washing your hands, another cup of some kind here. This some sort of life jacket that the Russians use. And then even here you've got old meal boxes, even with some things left inside there that you can see.
For nearly 2 months after the fighting, residents stayed away. A trickle have now started to return. For them, Russia's lasting effects here more than just bullet holes and bomb craters.
Not only do people who are trying to rebuild so often have to start from scratch, but there remain so many mines and pieces of unexploded ordnance that authorities are actually considering closing down this town for a few days until they can clear it.
It's open for now, though, which meant Valentina Mahornos could come back home for the first time in weeks. The weather was nice, so her niece and nephew played on the swing. Different than the last time they were here, when they hid in a basement, as bombs destroyed everything above.
Is it difficult to think about that?
I don't even know what to say.
What we can say is that this tiny town has turned into a symbol of sorts, a village mercilessly attacked that, in the end, stood its ground, a microcosm, perhaps, of the country in which it lies. Matt Rivers, CNN, Moshun, Ukraine.
And ahead on the show, horrific incident in COVID-stricken Shanghai. A man was sent to the morgue and then workers realized he was alive. We'll tell you what officials say happened and how they're responding to the outrage gripping Chinese social media. Right, before we go, we want to get you up to speed on other stories that we are following this hour. Now, in Shanghai, where millions of people are under government-enforced COVID lockdown, an elderly care home resident was mistakenly declared dead and then sent to the morgue on Sunday, but he was still alive. The district government says the man is now in a stable condition. Video of the incident was posted on Chinese social media, including the moment the workers realized that the man was alive. It has triggered a wave of horror and outrage online. For more, I'm joined by Selena Wang, who is in Kunming in China. Selena, I honestly had to do a double take on the story that I read. I couldn't believe my eyes. It is clearly incredibly shocking and also scary that it's reached this point.
People are horrified, Eleni, and it only adds to the anger and frustration of Shanghai residents. And they see this as another sign of the dysfunction and the failures of the government in executing this citywide lockdown. In response, authorities, they have fired several Shanghai officials, including the head of the nursing home where this man was taken from. They've also revoked the credentials of the doctor who was involved. And in the video, you can see the workers taking a yellow body bag to the morgue. You can see the workers unzipping the yellow bag, only to realize that the elderly man inside is still alive. Now, the bystander who was filming all of this happening, Eleni, he said in the video, quote, "The nursing home is such a mess. They sent a living person on a hearse and said they were dead. It is irresponsible, really irresponsible." And Eleni, as we've been talking about this lockdown, it has triggered this logistical mess. Many in Shanghai, they're still struggling to get enough food and daily essentials. They are still struggling to get what they need to get by day to day. Now, last week, authorities said that some neighborhoods would be able to relieve some of these lockdown restrictions, but still you've got millions sealed in their homes. And for those who can go out, this is a very tenuous freedom, since most stores, first of all, are closed. And if any COVID case is found in their community, that lockdown clock for another 14 days in their homes, that restarts again.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I can't remember the last time we saw so much outrage that has sort of seeped through into social media about the way the government is dealing with COVID. But the whole point is to try and avert, hardcore lockdown similar to what we saw in Shanghai. Is Beijing on the path of having a different experience? And I'm sure government is trying to make sure that this doesn't cause more outrage on the ground.
Yeah, exactly. We're seeing more organization in Beijing so far. They are reacting a lot earlier and more aggressively to the outbreak there. Officials are desperately trying to avoid the failures and chaos that we've seen in Shanghai. But still, this has been disrupting people's daily lives. Even though the daily case numbers are quite low, parts of the city are locking down. They've shut down schools, major entertainment venues like Universal Studios have closed down. In restaurant dining has been banned, and the city has been launching mass testing in rounds and rounds and rounds. They're testing more than 20 million residents 3 times in just 3 days. And also, residents need to start showing proof of negative COVID tests in order to enter any public venue, including to take public transportation. But we have seen residents stocking up. They are concerned after seeing what happened in Shanghai that this could potentially get worse.
All right, Selena, thanks so much. And I have to say, I'm actually counting down for your freedom as well. So stay safe. Good to see you. Much appreciated. Okay, so a heat wave gripping India and Pakistan is endangering the lives of millions of people. And as global warming worsens, experts warn there will be more frequent and longer heat waves across both countries. Here's, right, so that's the story that we will be following. And let's move on. All right, so a US-based space flight company called Rocket Lab is celebrating what it calls a monumental step forward. It used a helicopter to catch a rocket booster as it parachuted to Earth. The live stream shows the helicopter snagging the parachute before the pilot decided to drop the rocket. Take a look at that. Incredible footage. Okay, so officials describe the catch as spectacular. Private space flight companies are increasingly looking to reusable rockets and spacecraft to make their launches more affordable. And imagine waking up in a hotel room with a view of the solar system. The company Orbital Assembly is planning to launch 2 space stations within the next 5 years. One of them will be able to hold 400 people, and it's slated to open in 2027. And then another smaller station will be able to house 28 people and could be as operational as early as 2025. Both stations will also include office space and research facilities for rent. So basically, this is a space hotel. It sounds very exciting. If you want to run away from your reality on Earth, I guess this would be an option if you, of course, have very deep pockets. Incredible times that we're living in. All right, so thank you so very much for joining us. That was Connect the World. I'm Eleni Jokos, and CNN's coverage of Russia's invasion of Ukraine continues after this short break. You're watching CNN.
Wednesday, Nasha, in New York, and this is One World. This hour, we are following two breaking news stories for you. We have, of course, all the latest from Russia's war in Ukraine, and more on that stunning leaked draft decision from the U.S. Supreme Court that could completely upend abortion rights for women in much of the United States. I want to, though, start with what's happening in Ukraine. Russia's assault on Ukraine may be entering an explosive new phase as a dangerous deadline approaches. Western officials warned Vladimir Putin could formally declare war on Ukraine by May 9th in a move that would allow Moscow to fully mobilize its reserve forces. And U.S. intelligence indicates that the Kremlin is preparing to annex the separatist-controlled regions in Donetsk and Luhansk by mid-May, and it's considering a similar move in Kherson. It comes as fighting rages in southern and eastern Ukraine, but Moscow's offensive in the Donbass region appears to be struggling. Ukrainian government troops say they have repulsed a dozen Russian attacks in the past 24 hours. And to the north and east of Kharkiv, Ukraine claims to have taken back control of several areas. In Mariupol, a port city in utter ruins, surrounded by Russian forces, both sides say Kremlin troops are launching new assaults on the Azovstal steel plant, where hundreds of civilians, including children, remain trapped even as I speak. Ukrainian forces inside the plant say that they are repelling those attacks, but evacuations from the plant appear to have stalled. On Sunday, more than 100 civilians were able to escape that besieged complex, and they arrived in Zaporizhia just a few hours ago. Many of them have literally not seen sunshine for weeks. CNN's Nick Payton-Walsh was there when the buses pulled in. He spoke to a few of the visibly relieved people, but of course, they are war-weary. I want you to listen to this.
Yeah, I've actually just had an extraordinary conversation with the mother of Sviatoslav. Now, that may not mean much to you unless you saw the video of the first evacuees to emerge from the rubble of the Azovstal steel plant. Sviatoslav turned 6 months the day before he emerged in that video and had spent a third of his life underground in that basement. Just been talking to his mother, a French teacher, half the conversation we had in French and English, and extraordinary courage, but talking about, frankly, how it had been so hard to find anything to smile about, but even still, how soldiers in that basement had managed to bring to her diapers for her child, and dealing with the complexity of what on earth is she going to tell this son of hers, who from the age of 4 months to 6 months has been under this bombardment. And she said for her, the scariest noise now is an airplane, because that is the delivery mechanism Russia had for the explosions that landed on top of the factory where they were hiding. And she hopes that eventually one day she may become able to hear an airplane's noise again and not be quite so terrified, but is deeply concerned about that. And a number of stories emerging inside of this tent, to Olga in her 70s, who we spoke to, injured in her left ankle, concerned about her ability to fend for herself moving forwards. A lot of help, though, from NGOs and charity organisations here, the United Nations, the Red Cross, also Ukrainian NGO as well here, to be sure people have some kind of assistance as they move forwards here. But it's a scene of relief in there. It's a scene of, frankly, getting the first cup of coffee you may have had in a while. It's a scene of, for Olga, asking for us if we had any chocolate we could give her, which we fortunately did. Talking also, too, though, to the people inside the basement. Stories, certainly, or a great admiration for the Ukrainian armed forces, who are not only fending off the Russian onslaught, but still providing food to those people caught inside that basement. Delaney, sorry, I heard you talking there.
Yeah. Yeah, I was smiling, you know, I was thinking it's the simple things like chocolate that people will miss. You know, it's things that we take for granted, and it's incredibly moving to hear the stories that you're sharing with us. We actually saw images of women with her baby, and it's also heartwarming to see kids running around behind you, that perhaps they have a better future and some kind of hope. But Nick, I have to say, you've been covering these, you know, harrowing escapes from Mariupol, and they're fragile. The deals that are made between the Russians and the Ukrainians, sometimes they fall apart. What do we know in terms of trying to keep these corridors open?
Yeah, I mean, the hope had been, Eleni, that this first batch of evacuees might have created a mechanism that could be used to increase the volume. Remember, there were 100,000 people in Mariupol, civilians, facing imminently disease, frankly, as an escalating threat, but also Russian occupation, shelling as well. So much that threatens their lives. The hope had been that this would be a way to get them first 100 out from the Azovstal plant. We just have to move away from one of the buses here that's going to arrive to take away some of these evacuees. I understand they might be going to a hotel initially, but this is all part of the, as best as they could, choreographed operation that so many organizations have been involved in here. I mean, they first of all had to get people out of Azovstal. That was something the Ukrainian military were assistive with, and then subsequently had to get them through countless Russian checkpoints. Talking to a couple inside there, Vladimir and Victoria, they actually said that their journey didn't seem to have been spoiled so much by the Russians. They let them through, but that maybe because of the United Nations and the Red Cross. And that essentially had been the hope, that the UN and Red Cross would create this mechanism. It would be able to move fast to get a volume of individuals out. But people here just delighted to be able to have their first time to sit down and rest.
May 9th is a major holiday in Russia, and it holds enormous symbolic significance. It's a day of national pride commemorating the Soviet Union's defeat of Nazi Germany in 1945, and it's traditionally accompanied by a military parade in Moscow's Red Square. And this year, Victory Day comes at a time when Russia has failed to secure any decisive win on the battlefield in Ukraine. The US says that if Vladimir Putin uses the holiday to declare war, it would be, quote, a great irony. CNN Scott McLean joins us live now from Lviv. So Scott, up until this point, Russia has said that what's happening in Ukraine is a special operation. If a week from yesterday they end up declaring it as a full-blown, full-scale war, what changes in practical terms on the ground, Scott?
Well, first off, it seems like Western intelligence is suggesting that Vladimir Putin doesn't want to lose out on the chance to take advantage of this really symbolic day here, since the Russians, or at least the Russian propaganda and Vladimir Putin, are framing this invasion as a way to denazify Ukraine, in their words. And so taking advantage of this date when the Soviet Union defeated the Nazi Germany is obviously a very symbolic day. It's possible that the president could announce some kind of a victory, could announce war, or could announce simply an escalation in this. And that would allow President Putin to potentially bolster his troop counts in the eastern part of Ukraine, because declaring war rather than a special military operation, Zane, gives President Putin the option to formally institute a draft and also to call up reservists as well. One other interesting thing to point out is that Pope Francis, actually, of all people, gave an interview to an Italian newspaper, and in it he said that he had recently spoken to the Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, who said that Putin planned to end the invasion by May 9th. It would all be wrapped up. Now, the Pope is obviously quite skeptical that that is the case, but he said that perhaps that may explain some of the troop buildups that we've seen in the eastern part of the country, some of the heavy fighting that we've seen in the eastern part of the country. The Pope also saying that he's willing to go to Moscow to speak with President Putin directly if it helps to end the war. American estimates early on in the war, Zane, were that there were about 110,000 or so Russian troops surrounding Ukraine before the war. Now the estimates are that there are about 85,000 or so, and one military commander in the eastern part of the country said that the Russians are having a really hard time taking towns and villages on the ground, and so what they're doing instead is bombing them, shelling them, and flattening them to the ground in order to take that land. The Ukrainians say, look, we could hold that territory, but it would mean losing a lot of troops. So perhaps what this day could mean, May 9th, if in fact Putin does declare war and bolsters his troop count, perhaps that would make it easier for the Russians to take some of those towns and villages in eastern Ukraine, Zane.
All right, Scott McLean, live for us there. Thank you so much. Russian President Vladimir Putin is doubling down on his claim that Moscow is carrying out a special military operation, as I was just talking about with Scott. During a phone call with French President Emmanuel Macron earlier today, the Kremlin says that Mr. Putin briefed President Macron about the progress of the so-called operation to protect Donbass. He insisted that Russia is still open to dialogue despite the, quote, unpreparedness of Ukrainian officials. Macron's office says that during the conversation, he expressed his concern about the situation in Donbass and in Mariupol and called on Russia to, quote, live up to its responsibility as a UN Security Council member by stopping the attacks on Ukraine. Russia is raising the stakes in a dispute with Israel over Ukraine, this time accusing the Jewish state of supporting a neo-Nazi regime in Kyiv. It follows Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's claim on Italian TV that Hitler had, quote, Jewish blood. Lavrov was trying to support Kremlin rhetoric that the Russian invasion was needed to denazify Ukraine, but shrugged off the fact that Ukraine's president himself is Jewish. Volodymyr Zelensky loudly denounced Lavrov's remarks.
How could this be said on the eve of the anniversary of the victory over Nazism? These words mean that Russia's top diplomat is blaming the Jewish people for Nazi crimes. No words. Such an anti-Semitic thrust by their minister means Russia has forgotten all the lessons of World War II. Or maybe they never studied those lessons.
Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett also condemned Lavrov's comments, calling them lies. Hadass Gol has been following this story from Jerusalem. So Hadass, up until this point, Israel has, of course, verbally supported Ukraine and sympathized with Ukraine, but they've been very careful not to sort of outright criticize Russia. Does that change now? Will Israel support more sanctions against Russia or sending more weapons to Ukraine? What are your thoughts?
Well, that's a great question, Zain, and something that a lot of people here are asking, especially after the comments we've been seeing from Russia in the last few days. Today, the Russian Foreign Ministry somehow saying that Israel, the Jewish state created in the aftermath of World War II, in the aftermath of all those Nazi atrocities, is somehow supporting a neo-Nazi regime in Kyiv. They also tried to support this claim with a 1,000-word document to claim that they needed to denazify, that they could need to denazify a country with a Jewish president. They used examples of forced Jewish collaboration with the Nazis and contemporary instances of anti-Semitism in Ukraine. Now, as you noted, Israeli officials yesterday condemned loudly Lavrov's comments. The prime minister called them lies. The foreign minister called them outrageous and unforgivable, demanding an apology. The Russian ambassador was summoned. So far today, we have not heard from the foreign minister or the prime minister any sort of official reaction to today's comments, although the health minister, who does sit on the cabinet, said in a tweet there is no neo-Nazi regime in Ukraine. Zelensky is not a Nazi and his Judaism is unrelated. Now, yesterday, Foreign Minister Yair Lapid did say that Israel had been trying to maintain open relations with Russia, but that these comments had crossed the line. So now the question is, as you noted, will Israel now potentially go further? As you noted, Israel has condemned Russia's invasion. They've accused Russia of war crimes. They've been giving humanitarian aid to Ukraine. But so far, they haven't gone that extra step of joining Western sanctions against Russia or supplying military equipment to Ukraine. But today, there have been some Israeli media reports that Israeli officials are now considering sending some defensive military equipment to Ukraine. These are Israeli media reports that we have not confirmed. But also, whether there is a question about whether this will cause things to go further. Now, experts I have spoken to say that as things stand today, they don't think necessarily that Israel will change its stance. But if this continues, if this escalates, perhaps to the point of, for example, the Israeli ambassador in Russia being expelled somehow, then that could really force the issue even further. Zain.
Hadass Gold, live for us there. Thank you so much. All right, still to come here on One World, the U.S. Supreme Court will investigate the bombshell leak of a draft opinion that would strike down Roe versus Wade. We are live from the Supreme Court with the very latest on this story. US President Joe Biden just spoke to reporters about the bombshell leak of a Supreme Court draft opinion overturning Roe versus Wade. The 50-year-old decision protects abortion rights nationwide. Mr. Biden said that striking it down could threaten a whole range of rights. I want you to listen to what he had to say.
It concerns me a great deal that we're going to, after 50 years, decide a woman does not have a right to choose within the limits of the Supreme Court decision in Casey, number one. But even more, equally as profound is the rationale used. And it would mean that every other decision relating to the notion of privacy is thrown into question.
In a stunning breach of the court's secrecy, news outlet Politico published a draft of the full opinion on Roe versus Wade. The Supreme Court says the draft opinion is authentic but does not represent a decision. The court's marshal will investigate the source of the leak. Top Republican lawmakers, including Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy, are expressing outrage over this breach and earlier also did call for an investigation as well. CNN's justice correspondent Jessica Schneider joins us live now from outside the Supreme Court. So, Jessica, before we talk about this leak, let's talk about this draft decision. I mean, this hit the internet last night like an earthquake. What has been the reaction so far?
Yeah, there has been all types of reaction over the internet, also right here outside the Supreme Court. We saw people on both sides of the debate gathering at the court right after this was leaked and published by Politico around 8:30, 9 o'clock last night. And we've been seeing a stream of protesters throughout the morning here. This obviously galvanizes a lot of political thoughts and a political debate and political rage, if you will. Yes, this draft opinion from Justice Samuel Alito, 98 pages. If this were to become the final decision and the final draft and the final opinion from the Supreme Court, it would eliminate the constitutional right to obtain an abortion, something that has been practiced in this country for almost 50 years, dating back to Roe v. Wade in 1973. It was reaffirmed by Planned Parenthood versus Casey in 1992. So this has really sent a shockwave through the country. We typically don't get any indication about any possible decision at any point before a decision is actually released. The Supreme Court handles it very carefully. I've been covering the Supreme Court for the past 5 years. We weren't expecting this decision, and we still aren't, for possibly a few more weeks. The court ends its term typically at the end of June. Again, this is a draft decision. It has not been authenticated by CNN, but of course the Supreme Court now saying that it is authentic. But of course the justices here could change their minds. This was a draft decision that was circulated in February. Politico is reporting that Justice Samuel Alito has 4 other conservative-leaning justices with him, which makes the majority of 5-4 in this decision. But it's possible the justices could change their votes at any time before a final opinion is issued. But Zain, I have to say that if this turns out to be the ultimate decision, it would be a monumental and consequential decision for this country. It would leave the abortion decision in the hands of states. Any of the 50 states would have their own rights to make their own laws. We've already seen a flurry of Republican states restricting abortion rights. Some states have even passed laws that are set to go into effect that would flat out ban abortion, all in anticipation of this Supreme Court case, which we are now getting this glimpse of. Zain?
Jessica Schneider, live for us there. Thank you so much. The revelation of the draft opinion has galvanized Americans on both sides of this heated social and political battle and has reignited a decades-old debate.
I am incredibly optimistic. It looks like we're going to finally see justice for the unborn in this country, and finally Roe v. Wade will be overturned and recognized as the egregious, disastrous decision that it is.
You are not going to change and roll back the time, 50 years to where, women have to ask for permission to make decisions regarding our own bodies. We're not doing that.
Let's bring in, from Los Angeles, CNN legal analyst and author of the book Make It Rain, Ariva Martin. Ariva, thank you so much for being with us. So I just want to make it clear to our audience that this might not necessarily be the final version, this draft decision. It was technically dated February 10th. So, of course, the court might have changed its mind since then. Just walk us through what we need to know about what was leaked.
Yeah, you're right, Zane. This opinion that has been leaked through Politico is not the final decision. What happens with the Supreme Court, once an argument is presented by the lawyers to the court, the 9 justices assemble in a very private, very secretive space in the Supreme Court building, and they take a vote. And based on that vote, a justice is assigned to write the majority opinion. That opinion is then written in draft form and circulated amongst those 9 justices. Oftentimes, that process is designed to try to persuade a justice to maybe change his or her vote. But until that opinion is published, that opinion remains in draft form. So at this point, what has been leaked is that draft document that should have just been circulated amongst the justices, never ever published or leaked to the public, because at this point, the justices have an opportunity to change their minds, to vote yes or no. But this leaking is an astonishing and really appalling situation.
And as I speak, Ariva, it is being investigated. But we know that roughly around half of the states in this country are already working to restrict abortion rights. If this draft document is actually the final decision, if this is where everything lands, how will women in this country go about accessing abortions legally?
It's going to be very difficult. For women, particularly those women who have lower socioeconomic status, those women who don't have the means and the resources to travel from one state to the other.
In the red
states, because we know many of these red states, these conservative red states, have trigger laws, which mean as soon as Roe v. Wade is overturned, those laws at the state level immediately will abolish abortion in about half of the 50 states in the United States. So if you live in one of those red states and abortion is abolished in your state, you then have to travel. So you may have to travel from the South to California or to New York, states which will uphold the rights of women for abortions.
It's also important to note just what women did before 1973 in this country, before abortion was legalized, the sorts of measures, the extreme measures that women went to in order to get an abortion. Back alley abortions were popular. Also, these dangerous self-induced abortions as well. Just give us a brief history on what women in this country had to go through back then.
You're right, Zane. The fact that there wasn't laws on the books that made abortion legal didn't prevent women from getting abortions. Women have exercised their rights over their reproductive health for decades in this country. And unfortunately, when abortion wasn't legal, we did see women taking very extreme measures to end pregnancies. And many of those measures resulted in severe injuries to women and in some cases death. Women were going to, as you described, these back alley clinics. There were lots of procedures performed in unsterilized and unsafe environments. And that's the fear now, is that, yes, some women will be able to travel to states where abortions will be legal, but there will be many, many women who will be so disadvantaged by this seismic decision, if it is the final decision, that they will resort to very dangerous procedures to exercise their reproductive health rights, which is why this decision is so shocking. And my fear, Zane, is that this is not the end, that this is the beginning of the rolling back and the elimination of so many rights that we enjoy in the United States.
So you say, Ariva, you say it is shocking, but is it surprising? I mean, a lot of people are pointing out the fact that Justice Gorsuch and Justice Kavanaugh both said in their hearings that they would not do this, that they would not overturn. They had no desire to overturn Roe versus Wade. Does what has happened between last night and today, does any of it surprise you?
Doesn't surprise me, Zane. Shocking because there's a level of arrogance. Because when you look at where the United States is, over 50% of the country agrees that women should have the right to choose. So you have 5 justices making decisions that are completely contradictory to where the American people are. But not surprising, because we know for decades now, Republicans have been planning very methodically to roll back Roe v. Wade, to have it overturned, and to send us back to an era where women didn't have control over their bodies, didn't have agency over their own health. And this decision literally makes women second-class citizens, gives men control and agency over their bodies in a way that women in the United States will not have. So no, it's not surprising, because those three justices that you just identified, they sat before Senate confirmation hearings and said that they would uphold Roe v. Wade as precedent. But we know that they all came out of the Federalist Society, which a litmus test for being appointed to the Supreme Court by the Federalist Society was your willingness to overturn Roe v. Wade. So this has been in the works for decades.
And Riva, just very, very quickly, do you think that there was an intention behind this document being leaked, either to sway the court in one direction or another? I know that's sort of an impossible question, but I would love your opinion on that.
Yeah, there's absolutely speculation on both sides, Zane. Some believe that it was the rights, the conservative effort to have this opinion leaked to dull its impact leading into the midterm. So to get all this outrage out now so that people would kind of forget about it by the time the midterms roll around in November of this year. Others believe that the left may have leaked it in order to galvanize voters to go to the polls in November and to vote for those legislators who will uphold the rights of women to choose how they conduct their reproductive rights, how they exercise rights over their own bodies.
Okay, so it could have been either side responsible, but as we pointed out, an investigation is underway. There's a lot of outrage in the political circles about how on earth this document could have been leaked in the first place. Reba Martin, live for us there. Thank you so much. Right, still to come here on One World, rebuilding a community that was heavily damaged by war. Hear from Ukrainians near Kyiv who are desperately trying to piece their lives back together. Hello and welcome back to One World. In a town northwest of Kyiv, residents are desperately trying to rebuild their community after Russian forces pulled out. They left behind some of the worst damage of the war so far. CNN's Matt Rivers got a look at the devastation.
At the entrance to the Ukrainian village of Moshun, an effigy twists in the breeze. A uniform stripped off a dead Russian soldier, stuffed and hung from a tree. People hate Russia here because of what it did. The tiny town northwest of Kyiv has been leveled. Russian bombs, rockets, bullets destroyed street after street after street. This was the site of some of the most intense fighting of the war so far. On their drive toward Kyiv, the Russians attacked soldiers and civilians alike here. Ukrainian bunkers alongside ordinary houses, shelled relentlessly to devastating effect.
This was probably somebody's kitchen. You can see there's a oven there, some pots and pans, a microwave. I mean, this isn't a big city, but the scale of destruction in this village is on par with anything else we've seen across Ukraine. I mean, this house gets hit with artillery, there's a subsequent fire, and just look, I mean, it's eviscerated. If there is a building in this village that hasn't been damaged in this fighting, we haven't seen it yet.
Boom, 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 fire, fire. It was everywhere. It's nightmare.
Valentina Forsa has lived in Moshun for years and has never known war until it landed on her doorstep and forced her down into a neighbor's basement.
How scared were you?
We were very scared. My heart was beating very fast. We thought we would die there. The Russians fired indiscriminately.
The fighting only eased when Russia withdrew from the entire Kyiv region. Valentina emerging from the basement to find shell casings in her garden and whatever else the Russians left behind.
So all these things she says the Russians left behind. So this for washing your hands, another cup of some kind here. There's some sort of life jacket that the Russians use. And then even here you've got old meal boxes, even with some things left inside there that you can see.
For nearly 2 months after the fighting, residents stayed away. A trickle have now started to return. For them, Russia's lasting effects here more than just bullet holes and bomb craters.
Not only do people who are trying to rebuild so often have to start from scratch, but there remain so many mines and pieces of unexploded ordnance that authorities are actually considering closing down this town for a few days until they can clear it.
It's open for now, though, which meant Valentina Mahornos could come back home for the first time in weeks. The weather was nice, so her niece and nephew played on the swing. Different than the last time they were here, when they hid in a basement, as bombs destroyed everything above.
Is it difficult to think about that?
I don't even know what to say.
What we can say is that this tiny town has turned into a symbol of sorts, a village mercilessly attacked that, in the end, stood its ground, a microcosm, perhaps, of the country in which it lies. Matt Rivers, CNN, Moshun, Ukraine.
While much of the West has been punishing Russia for invading Ukraine, many other countries are not following suit. In fact, when global leaders voted to suspend Russia from the UN Human Rights Council, countries representing about 3/4 of the world's population did not go along. That's according to USA Today, which also noted that the nations either siding with Russia or abstaining from involving themselves in the conflict are diverse and their motivations are complex. Some are massive nations such as China and India with calculated geopolitical strategies. Some are Russian sympathizers with leaders who stand to benefit from a Kremlin victory. And many are less wealthy countries, often without a strong democratic government, that feel trapped between the ideological battles of two superpowers. Time now for the exchange and a deeper look at why many countries have decided not to punish Russia. Joining me live now is Parag Khanna, a former senior advisor at the US Defense Department. Parag, thank you so much for being with us. So there are just under 200 countries in the world. Most of them, as I pointed out, at least according to that USA Today article, have refused to take a concrete stand in this war, either against Russia or for Russia. But there are a lot of countries that actually do actively support Russia. The number of countries that actively support Ukraine are actually, surprisingly, in the minority. Why do you think that is?
Well, first of all, I don't think that it should really be a numerical, accounting exercise of how many supporters does Russia have versus how many does Ukraine have. There's no question that even in countries where the leadership and the government is officially taking a position where it abstains from criticizing Russia, or where it's perhaps an ally commercially or geopolitically of Russia, there will still be a strong sympathy for what has happened in Ukraine. And also, of course, some countries, quite frankly, matter more than others in terms of the weight of their vote and of their position. For example, as you mentioned at the beginning, China and India. So rather than doing kind of the counting exercise, I think what's more interesting, as you also pointed out, is the range of countries around the world that Russia has cultivated, built relationships with, has trade or military agreements with. That does include, of course, indeed, China, India, African countries, Latin American countries. And it is that geographical breadth and range of types of government, whether it's authoritarian or democratic societies, that because of those historical or current relations with Russia are more or less, quote unquote, taking that side.
So you point out the sort of economic reasons, the sort of military reasons why some countries might be inclined to support Russia. In this USA Today article, Joel Shannon, the author of this article, says that there might be ideological reasons as well, because some countries, in his view, have a sort of deep resentment for America's history of political and military intervention. Do you believe that in addition to sort of economic and military reasons, there are also ideological reasons why some countries choose not to support Ukraine in this?
Well, I don't think we should lump everything under the term ideology. So, for example, what you're referring to is history, not necessarily just ideology. There are countries that, of course, that have very valid historical reasons from their own experience to be suspicious of colonial interventions or Western powers because of the history of colonialism, Cold War interventions, dealings with odious governments, and so forth. And that's perfectly legitimate as a historical reflection and cause for suspicion. Ideology would be if a country says, we are a fellow like-minded authoritarian state. We support authoritarian regimes as a matter of principle, and therefore we believe that what Russia is doing in terms of violating the sovereignty of other countries and forcibly subjugating them and trying to dismember the state, that is legitimate for that reason. That would be ideological. It ironically, perhaps, even the countries that may sort of support what Putin is doing, or at least not condemn it, like China, have their own concerns about the territorial integrity of their states. So there is obviously an irony in that position. But I would hesitate to say ideology, again, simply because there are countries that are democratic societies, places like India, even if the government is leaning towards illiberalism, that are, again, you would lump into the so-called ideology, but then the model would fall apart. So it really is very much just about the national interest. And as you pointed out, it can be a geopolitical interest or an economic interest. Countries that are buying a lot of oil from Russia, countries that are buying a lot of food from Russia, countries that simply, even if they're not, as you've widely reported as well at CNN, the supply chain effects in agriculture, fertilizer, and so forth have these rippling, cascading effects through global supply chains and are making life very difficult for ordinary citizens and consumers all over the world in some of the poorest countries in the world that are already struggling with COVID. So it's very difficult to separate some of these grand issues that are challenging societies, and therefore I don't want to make it a matter of ideology to say that they're really just concerned about their own survival.
Yeah. So it's much more nuanced than that. Just sort of quickly, my final question.
Absolutely.
And that is, the United States and Western Europe see this war as very black and white. There's obviously a clear aggressor and basically a clear victim in this war. There are many countries for whom, the broad consensus as to who is to blame and who is the aggressor and who is the victim is a bit more nuanced than that. Just walk us through that.
There is, in the sense that there's a couple of things to unpack there. I know we're running out of time, but the fact is that Russia and Ukraine have had these sort of unsettled borders for quite a while. And so there is a perspective, certainly in the Russian-leaning camp, that these borders were not settled and need to be settled. And if, Russia has taken this aggressive approach, there is some justification for that. Obviously, that's not a position that one, at least I certainly don't sympathize with, but it's out there. But I think we'll probably have to leave it at that for now.
Yeah, we are. You've obviously been on TV before. We are running out of time. All right. Thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate it. And thank you so much for watching One World. I'm Zain Asher. African Voices up next. You are watching CNN.
Welcome to African Voices. I'm Ari Chokpo, and this week's episode is all about dance. The art form keeps evolving over time, and today's dancers leverage social media and the internet to make gaining exposure easier than ever. Still, some stand out more than others, like this change-making dancer I'm about to introduce you to out of Ghana.
Dance is life to me. Dance is the expression of my feeling through the movement of my body. Dance is my way to connect to people. Dance is my way to touch the lives of people. Dance is my way to bring change into my community and give back to the society. I dance to impact change and also to provide hope for the vulnerable. My name is Incredible Ziggy, and I'm a change maker. Welcome to Dance with Ziggy. So today we are going to dance to Yaba by Sarkodie. So let's get into it. Gee.
After you jump back, then our right foot. Ready? Go. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Incredible Ziggy has been a dance phenomenon for over 17 years.
I used to freestyle in the hoods, dancing at funerals, parties, weddings. Anytime I hear sound somewhere, I'll just call my boys, Charlie, make me go dance, make me go dance. So that was something I was doing since I was a kid.
Today, the energetic Ghanaian freestyler floats seamlessly between teaching classes and broadcasting new moves on his social accounts. A global following and awards to boot, Ziggy says it took a lot of perseverance to get to where he is now.
This one is from Africa Business and Art Awards. The family where I'm coming from, everybody is really so much into books. They want you to be a lawyer, they want you to be a doctor. People don't really believe in being a dancer as a profession. I decided to be a change into the community, so I went for it, and here we are now.
Despite the lack of support and money in the beginning, Ziggy says his passion paved the way to success, with some help from his phone.
Let me check my DM. We'll have to go again. I was getting discouraged at some point, but I still wanted to go for it because that's what I felt good about. So when social media came through, I created a page and I posted a video and I had over 1,000 views. I was like, wow, 1,000 people just watched me here in Accra, Ghana. And I realized there are so many foreigners too in there who were so much interested in our craft.
His first big break came when he entered an online dance challenge organized by popular Nigerian recording artist Patoranking.
And I qualified to go to Nigeria, and I was in the first class hotel, first class flight, and I was paid $500. That was really huge for me. I was like, so I can dance to get this money. When I came back and I told my dad this was what I was paid, like, oh wow, really? So he ended up beginning to support me. He saw me in several music videos. So far, I've featured in almost every video here in Ghana.
Today, the self-taught star performs on big stages across the world and has choreographed for famous African musicians.
I've been to Russia, UK, I've been on an African tour, South Africa, Benin, Rwanda, Togo, Nigeria, a whole lot. Just for my dance craft, I've been able to judge dance battles where you can also earn from an ambassador for brands. I've choreographed for almost every popular Ghanaian artist here. I've choreographed for international acts like Davido, Burna Boy. I was on the Afro Nation. You know, I choreographed all these big artists on how to move on the stage and all that. That was another big highlight for me.
But he says his most rewarding project so far is AfroZig, a group he created to help young Ghanaian street dancers.
AfroZig is a street movement where we pick talents from these rural areas on the streets, just like I used to be, and give them hope, you know, help them, nurture them into professionals, you know, groom them well. I have like over 200 dancers who are all under AfroZig that I'm grooming. I'm helping a few of them with accommodation. You know, AfroZig is really trying to bring change through our dance craft to impact onto these young ones and vulnerable ones.
Ziggy and his AfroZig team frequently put on free performances in underdeveloped neighborhoods in Accra.
Before I met Ziggy and the AfroZig group, I was just a freestyler. And then since that, my whole life has changed. I've been able to be a professional dance coach now. I've been able to be a professional choreographer now. I've been on big stages with other artists. He actually funded for my education to complete senior high. So he's helped me financially with my profession.
I feel so good, I feel so fulfilled being able to change someone's life. So I feel like that's my topmost priority and my social responsibility to give back to them.
Next, Ziggy has a full circle moment with a famous singer.
Dance brings people together, so many cultures together. Dance is a powerful tool. It brings change, it brings acceptance. Dance can really do a lot.
Incredible Ziggy is always dancing, even when he's sitting still.
I'm dancing literally every day, because even in the car, you see me dancing. And my eyes can even be dancing right now.
Ziggy, born Michael Amofa, is best known as a dancer, choreographer, and Instagram sensation, creating dance steps that have gone viral. He says his style was influenced by the late pop star Michael Jackson.
I always looked up to Michael Jackson because of his stage craft, the way he communicates with the crowd, his movements and everything. He was someone I really looked up to.
And when Janet Jackson used some of Ziggy's dance moves on The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon, the Ghanaian says he couldn't believe it.
I saw beeps on my phones. People were mentioning me on my Instagram that Janet Jackson did my Pilolo and Coupe dance. She actually did both of my dance steps. For Janet Jackson to do my dance step, it was like a dream come true, because somebody you're looking up to was growing up and his sister ends up doing it. It was like the whole thing coming back to me.
Ziggy says that being a professional dancer in Ghana hasn't been easy, something he's trying to change for the next generation.
The support and all that is not really good here. People end up judging us as rascals, aimless people, but gradually we are breaking the rules with performing on big stages. People are beginning to accept us. So we are trying to be the change. There are so many lives tied to ours, and we want to give back to the society. I feel like this is it for me. This is mine for me to do, to connect to people, to help people, to give back to the community, just like that with my craft. And that's the best way I can serve that.
He created a non-profit organization called the Afro-Zig Foundation in 2020 to give back to the streets he used to dance on.
So what we do is we go to the streets, we feed them, we give them food, sometimes we add clothes, and make sure that we spot the talents within the vulnerable and the needy. Because there could be talent there too. It's not only about those who can actually do it, but then the needy, we get to explore, we get to exploit and see what they can really do, then we decide to support them.
We followed Ziggy along on a talent scouting trip.
So I've been coming there almost every month to pick two talents to groom them into Afro-Zig. So let's just go there, let's see how it goes.
One of our vision is to ensure that we expand our activities across the nation, because currently most of the activities we are doing is centered in Accra. All the funding is through the founder, which is Incredible Ziggy, through his proceeds he gets from his performances, his endorsement deals and the rest. So one of our appeal is for us to be able to get some source of funding to be able to expand and scale up our activities across Ghana. So for me, it's a huge fulfillment to see that I'm supporting such a great initiative and volunteering to be able to touch the lives of many people.
Ziggy says he'll never stop dancing or helping bring up other Ghanaian dancers.
I'm going to keep my focus on that in these communities, coming up with dance classes, free dance events where I have big artists also perform. So these are some of the things we are bringing up for the foundation. I mean, I've got so many wild dreams, but then my most wildest is to be one of the few who brought change with their dance craft.